unreeled. Vintage recordings of fiction recovered from discontinued physical media.
Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Read by Miriam Margolyes and Martin Jarvis. My father's family name being Pirrip, and my Christian name Philip, my infant tongue could make of both names nothing longer or more explicit than Pip. So I called myself Pip, and came to be called Pip. I gave Pirrip as my father's family name on the authority of his tombstone, as I never saw my father or my mother, and never saw those 5 little brothers of mine, whose 5 little stone lozenges were arranged in a neat row beside their grave. Ours was the marsh country down by the river, within 20 miles of the sea. My first, most vivid and broad impression of the identity of things seems to me to have been gained on a memorable raw afternoon towards evening. At such time I found out for certain that this bleak place overgrown with nettles was the churchyard, and that the dark flat wilderness beyond the churchyard, intersected with dykes and mounds and gates, with scattered cattle feeding on it, was the marshes, and that the low leaden line beyond was the river, and that the distant savage lair from which the wind was rushing was the sea, and that the small bundle of shivers growing afraid of it all and beginning to cry was Pip.
"Hold your noise!"
cried a terrible voice as a man started up from among the graves at the side of the church porch.
"Keep still, you little devil, or I'll cut your throat!"
A fearful man, all in coarse grey, with a great iron on his leg, and smothered in mud, seized me by the chin.
"Oh, don't cut my throat, sir. Pray don't do it, sir."
"Tell us your name, quick!"
"Pip, sir."
"Show us where you live. Point out the place."
I pointed to where our village lay, on the flat inshore among the alder trees and pollards, a mile or more from the church.
"Now looky here," said the man. "Where's your mother?"
"There, sir."
He started, made a short run, and stopped and looked over his shoulder. I timidly explained.
"There, sir. Also Georgiana, wife of the above. That's my mother."
"Oh, and is that your father along of your mother?"
"Yes, sir. Him too. Late of this parish."
"Huh. Who do you live with, supposing you're kindly let to live, which I hadn't made up my mind about?"
"My sister, sir. Mrs. Joe Gargery, wife of Joe Gargery, the blacksmith, sir."
"Blacksmith, eh?"
And he looked down at his leg.
"Now looky here. The question being whether you're to be let to live. You know what a file is?"
"Yes, sir."
"And you know what whittles is?"
"Yes, sir."
"You get me a file, and you get me whittles. You bring 'em both to me tomorrow morning early, that file and them whittles. You bring the lot to me at that old battery over yonder. You do it, and you never dare to say a word, or dare to make a sign concerning your having seen such a person as me, or any person somever, and you shall be let live. You fail, or you go from my words in any particular, no matter how small it is, and your heart and your liver shall be tore out, roasted, and ate. Now I ain't alone, as you may think I am. There's a young man hid with me, in comparison with which young man I am a angel. That young man hears the words I speak. That young man has a secret way, peculiar to himself, of getting at a boy, and at his heart, and at his liver. Now what do you say?"
I said that I would get him the file, and I would get him what bits of food I could, and I would come to him at the battery early in the morning.
"Say Lord strike you dead if you don't."
I said so.
"Now you remember what you've undertook, and you remember that young man, and you get home."
Good night, sir."
"Much of that,"
said he, glancing about him over the cold, wet flat.
"I wish I was a frog, or an eel."
I set my face towards home, and made the best use of my legs, and ran home without stopping. My sister, Mrs. Joe Gargery, was more than 20 years older than I, and had established a great reputation with herself and the neighbours because she had brought me up by hand. Having at that time to find out for myself what the expression meant, and knowing her to have a hard and heavy hand, and to be much in the habit of laying it upon her husband as well as upon me, I supposed that Joe Gargery and I were both brought up by hand. She was not a good-looking woman, my sister, and I had a general impression that she must have made Joe Gargery marry her by hand. Joe was a fair man, with curls of flaxen hair on each side of his smooth face, and with eyes of such a very undecided blue that they seemed to have somehow got mixed up with their own whites. He was a mild, good-natured, sweet-tempered, easy-going, foolish, dear fellow, a sort of Hercules in strength, and also in weakness. My sister, Mrs. Joe, with black hair and eyes, had such a prevailing redness of skin that I sometimes used to wonder whether it was possible she washed herself with a nutmeg grater instead of soap. She was tall and bony, and almost always wore a coarse apron, fastened over her figure behind with 2 loops, and having a square impregnable bib in front that was stuck full of pins and needles. Joe's forge adjoined our house. When I ran home from the churchyard, the forge was shut up, and Joe was sitting alone in the kitchen, in the chimney corner.
Mrs. Joe has been out a dozen times looking for you, Pip, and she's out now making it a baker's dozen.
Has she been gone long, Joe?
I always treated him as a larger species of child, and as no more than my equal. Joe glanced up at the clock.
Well, she's been on the rampage this last spell about 5 minutes, Pip. Here, she's a-coming.
I got behind Joe as my sister, Mrs. Joe, threw the door wide open.
Where have you been, you young monkey? Tell me directly what you've been doing to wear me away with fret and fright and worrit, or I'd have you out of that corner if you was 50 pips and he was 500 Gargerys. I've only been to the churchyard. Churchyard? If it weren't for me, you'd have been to the churchyard long ago and stayed there. Who brought you up by hand? You did. And why did I do it, I should like to know? I don't know. I don't? I'd never do it again, I know that. I may truly say I've never had this apron off since born you were. It's bad enough to be a blacksmith's wife and him a Gargery without being your mother.
My thoughts strayed as I looked disconsolately at the fire. The fugitive out on the marshes with the iron leg, the mysterious young man, the file, the food, and the dreadful pledge I was under to commit a larceny on those sheltering premises rose before me in the avenging coals.
Ha! Churchyard, indeed!
And Mrs. Joe applied herself to set the tea things. That day was Christmas Eve, and I had to stir the pudding that evening for the next day. When I had done my stirring and was taking a final warm in the chimney corner before being sent up to bed, there was a noise in the distance.
Hark! Was that great guns, Joe?
Ah, there's another convict off.
Oh, what does that mean, Joe?
Mrs. Joe, who always took explanations upon herself, said snappishly,
Escaped! Escaped! Prison ships right across the marshes. I wonder who's put into prison ships and why they're put there,
said I in a general way and with quiet desperation. It was too much for Mrs. Joe, who immediately rose.
I tell you what, young fella, I didn't bring you up by hand to badger people's lives out. It would be blame to me and not praise if I had. People are put in the hulks because they murder and because they rob and forge and do all sorts of bad, and they always begin by asking questions. Now, you get along to bed.
I was never allowed a candle to light me to bed, and as I went upstairs in the dark with my head tingling, from Mrs. Joe's thimble having played the tambourine upon it, to accompany her last words, I felt fearfully sensible of the great convenience that the hulks were handy for me. I was clearly on my way there. I had begun by asking questions, and I was going to rob Mrs. Joe. As soon as the great black velvet pall outside my little window was shot with grey, I got up and went downstairs, every board upon the way and every crack in every board calling after me, "Stop, thief!" and "Get up, Mrs. Joe!" In the pantry I stole some bread, some rind of cheese, about half a jar of mincemeat, some brandy from a stone bottle, which I decanted into a smaller glass bottle, and a beautiful round, compact pork pie. There was a door in the kitchen communicating with the forge. I unlocked and unbolted the door, and got a file from among Joe's tools. Then I put the fastenings as I had found them, opened the door at which I had entered when I ran home last night, shut it, and ran for the misty marshes. The mist was heavier yet when I got out upon the marshes. I knew my way to the battery pretty straight, for I had been down there on a Sunday with Joe, and Joe, sitting on an old gun, had told me that when I was prenticed to him regularly bound, we would have such larks there. I had just crossed a ditch, which I knew to be very near the battery, when I saw the man sitting before me. His back was towards me, and he had his arms folded, and was nodding forward, heavy with sleep. I went forward and touched him on the shoulder. He instantly jumped up, and it was not the same man, but another man. And yet this man was dressed in coarse grey too, and had a great iron on his leg. He swore an oath at me, made a hit at me that missed me, and then ran into the mist.
It's the young man,
I thought, feeling my heart shoot as I identified him. I dare say I should have felt a pain in my liver too, if I had known where it was. I was soon at the battery after that, and there was the right man, hugging himself and limping to and fro, as if he had never all night left off hugging and limping, waiting for me. I opened my bundle and emptied my pockets.
What's in the bottle, boy?
brandy, sir.
He was already handing mincemeat down his throat, but he left off to take some of the liquor, staring distrustfully while he did so at the mist all round us.
You're not a deceiving imp. You brought no one with you.
No, sir, no.
Nor give no one the office to follow you.
No.
Well, I believe you. You be but a fierce young hound indeed, if at your time of life you could help to hunt a wretched warmint, hunted as near death and dunghill as this poor wretched warmint is.
Something clicked in his throat, as if he had works in him like a clock and was going to strike, and he smeared his ragged rough sleeve over his eyes. Pitying his desolation and watching him as he gradually settled upon the pie, I made bold to say,
I am glad you enjoy it.
Did you speak?
I said I was glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you, my boy. I do.
I am afraid you won't leave any of it for him.
Leave any for him? Who's him?
The young man that you spoke of, that was hit with you.
Oh, him. Yes, yes. He don't want no whittles.
I thought he looked as if he did.
The man stopped eating and regarded me with the keenest scrutiny and the greatest surprise.
Looked? When?
Just now.
Where?
Yonder. Over there, where I found him nodding asleep and thought it was you.
He held me by the collar and stared at me so that I began to think his first idea about cutting my throat had revived.
Dressed like you know, only with a hat.
I explained, trembling.
And
I was very anxious to put this delicately.
And with the same reason for wanting to borrow a file.
This man. Did you notice anything in him?
He had a badly bruised face,
said I, recalling what I hardly knew I knew.
Not here.
And the man struck his left cheek mercilessly with the flat of his hand.
Yes, there.
Where is he?
He crammed what little food was left into the breast of his grey jacket.
Show me the way he went. I'll put him down like a bloodhound. Curse this iron on my sore leg. Give us hold of the file, boy.
I indicated in what direction the mist had shrouded the other man, and he looked up at it for an instant. Then he was down on the rank wet grass, filing at his iron like a madman. I told him I must go, but he took no notice, so I thought the best thing I could do was to slip off. The last I saw of him, his head was bent over his knee, and he was working hard at his fetter, muttering impatient imprecations at it and at his leg. The last I heard of him, I stopped in the mist to listen, and the file was still going.
And where the deuce have you been?
Was Mrs. Joe's Christmas salutation when I and my conscience showed ourselves. I said I had been down to hear the carols.
Ah, well, you might have done worse.
Not a doubt of that, I thought.
Perhaps if I weren't a blacksmith's wife, and what's the same thing, a slave with her apron never off, I should have been to hear the carols.
We were to have a superb dinner, consisting of a leg of pickled pork and greens, and a pair of roast stuffed fowls. A handsome mince pie had been made yesterday morning, which accounted for the mincemeat not being missed, and the pudding was already on the boil. Mr. Wopsle, the clerk at the church, was to dine with us, and Mr. Hubble, the wheelwright, and Mrs. Hubble, and Uncle Pumblechook, Joe's uncle, but Mrs. Joe appropriated him, who was a well-to-do corn chandler in the nearest town, and drove his own chaise cart. The dinner hour was 1:30. The time came without bringing with it any relief to my feelings, and the company came.
"Ah, Mrs. Joe,"
said Uncle Pumblechook, a large, hard-breathing, middle-aged, slow man, with a mouth like a fish and dull, staring eyes.
I have brought you, as the compliments of the season, I have brought you, Mum, a bottle of sherry wine, and I have brought you, Mum, a bottle of port wine."
Every Christmas Day he presented himself as a profound novelty with exactly the same words, and carrying the two bottles like dumbbells. Every Christmas Day Mrs. Joe replied as she now replied.
"Oh, Uncle Pumblechook, this is kind."
Every Christmas Day he retorted as he now retorted.
"It's no more than your merits. And now, are you all bobbish? And how's 6 penn'orth of halfpence?"
Meaning me. Mr. Wopsle said grace with theatrical declamation, and ended with the very proper aspiration that we might be truly grateful. Upon which my sister fixed me with her eye, and said in a low, reproachful voice,
"Do you hear that? Be grateful."
"Especially," said Mr. Pumblechook, "be grateful, boy, to them which brought you up by hand."
Mrs. Hubble shook her head, and contemplating me with a mournful presentiment that I should come to no good, asked,
"Why is it that the young are never grateful?"
This moral mystery seemed too much for the company, until Mr. Hubble tersely solved it by saying, "Naturally awicious." Everybody then murmured, "True,"
True.
and looked at me in a particularly unpleasant and personal manner. By degrees I became calm enough to partake of the dinner. I began to think I should get over the day, when my sister said,
"You must taste such a delightful and delicious present of Uncle Pumblechook's. It's a pie, a savoury pork pie."
The company murmured their compliments. Uncle Pumblechook said,
"Well, Mrs. Joe, we'll do our best endeavours. Let us have a cut at this same pie."
My sister went out to get it. I heard her steps proceed to the pantry. I have never been absolutely certain whether I uttered a shrill yell of terror merely in spirit, or in the bodily hearing of the company. I felt that I could bear it no more, and that I must run away. I released the leg of the table, and ran for my life. But I ran no further than the house door, for there I ran into a party of soldiers with their muskets, one of whom held out a pair of handcuffs to me, saying, "Here you are, look sharp, come on." The apparition of a file of soldiers ringing down the butt ends of their loaded muskets on our doorstep caused the dinner party to rise from the table in confusion, and caused Mrs. Joe, re-entering the kitchen empty-handed, to stop short and stare. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," said the sergeant. "I am on the chase in the name of the king, and I want the blacksmith."
"And pray what might you want with him?"
retorted my sister, quick to resent his being wanted at all. "Missus, speaking for myself, I should reply, the honour and pleasure of his fine wife's acquaintance. Speaking for the king, I answer, a little job done." This was received as rather neat in the sergeant, insomuch that Mr. Pumblechook cried audibly,
"Good again!"
"You see, blacksmith," said the sergeant, who had by this time picked out Joe with his eye, "we've had an accident with these, and I find the lock of one of them goes wrong, and the coupling don't act pretty. As they are wanted for immediate service in the hunt for 2 escaped convicts, will you throw your eye over them?" Joe threw his eye over them, and pronounced that the job would necessitate the lighting of his forge fire, and would take nearer 2 hours than 1. "Oh, will it? Then will you set about it at once, blacksmith?" At last Joe's job was done, and the ringing and roaring stopped. As Joe got on his coat, he proposed that he and I should go down with the soldiers and see what came of the hunt. When we were all out in the raw air and were steadily moving towards the marshes, I treasonably whispered to Joe,
"I hope, Joe, we shan't find 'em."
And Joe whispered to me, "I'd give a shilling if they'd cut and run, Pip." With my heart pumping, I looked all about for any sign of the convicts. I could see none, and I could hear none. The soldiers were moving on in the direction of the old battery, and we were moving on a little way behind them, when all of a sudden we all stopped. For there had reached us on the wings of the wind and rain a long shout, then one voice calling, "Murder!" and another voice, "Convicts! Runaways! Guard! This way for the runaway convicts!" Then both voices would seem to be stifled in a struggle, and then would break out again. The soldiers ran like deer, and Joe too, taking me with him. "Here are both men," panted the sergeant, struggling at the bottom of a ditch. "Surrender, you two, and confound you for 2 wild beasts! Come asunder!" Water was splashing, and mud was flying, and oaths were being sworn, and blows were being struck, when some more men went down into the ditch to help the sergeant, and dragged out separately my convict and the other one.
"Mind,"
said my convict, wiping blood from his face with his ragged sleeves, and shaking torn hair from his fingers.
"I took him. I give him up to you. Mind that."
"It's not much to be particular about," said the sergeant. "It'll do you small good, my man, being in the same plight yourself. Handcuffs there."
"I don't expect it to do me any good. I don't want it to do me more good than it does now,"
said my convict with a greedy laugh.
"I took him. He knows it. That's enough for me."
The other convict was livid to look at.
"Take notice, guard. He tried to murder me,"
were his first words.
"Tried to murder him,"
said my convict disdainfully.
"Try and not do it. I took him and give him up. That's what I done. I not only prevented him getting off the marshes, but I dragged him here, dragged him this far on his way back. He's a gentleman, if you please, this villain. Now the hulks has got its gentleman again through me. Murder him, when I could do worse and drag him back."
The other fugitive, who was evidently in extreme horror of his companion, repeated, "He tried to murder me."
"Do you see him?"
pursued my convict.
"Do you see what a villain he is? Do you see those grovelling and wandering eyes? That's how he looked when we were tried together. He never looked at me."
"Enough of this parley. Light those torches." As one of the soldiers complied, my convict looked round him for the first time, and saw me. I looked at him eagerly when he looked at me, and slightly moved my hands and shook my head. I had been waiting for him to see me, that I might try to assure him of my innocence. It was not at all expressed to me that he even comprehended my intention, for he gave me a look that I did not understand, and it all passed in a moment. But if he had looked at me for an hour or for a day, I could not have remembered his face ever afterwards as having been more attentive.
"All right. March."
My convict suddenly turned to the sergeant and remarked,
"I wish to say something respecting this escape. It may prevent some persons laying under suspicion along of me. I took some victuals up at the village over yonder."
"Took? You mean stole?"
"And I'll tell you where from. From the blacksmith's."
"Hallo," said the sergeant, staring at Joe. "Hallo, Pip," said Joe, staring at me.
"It was a dram of liquor and a pie."
"Have you happened to miss such an article as a pie, blacksmith? My wife did at the very moment when you came in, don't you know, Pip?" My convict turned his eyes on Joe in a moody manner, and without the least glance at me.
"So you're the blacksmith, are you? Then I'm sorry to say I've eat your pie."
"Oh, God knows you're welcome to it. We don't know what you've done, but we wouldn't have you starve to death for it, poor miserable fellow creature. Would us, Pip?" The something that I had noticed before clicked in the man's throat again, and he turned his back. The sergeant thereupon marched the two men away. At the time when I stood in the churchyard reading the family tombstones, I had just enough learning to be able to spell them out. Biddy was Mr. Wopsle's great-aunt's granddaughter. I confess myself quite unequal to the working out of the problem what relation she was to Mr. Wopsle. She was an orphan like myself. Like me, too, had been brought up by hand. It was by the help of Biddy that I struggled through the alphabet as if it had been a bramble bush, getting considerably worried and scratched by every letter. However, compared with mine, Joe's education, like steam, was yet in its infancy. Pursuing the subject one evening in the kitchen, I inquired,
"Didn't you ever go to school, Joe, when you was as little as me?"
"No, Pip."
"Why didn't you ever go to school, Joe, when you was as little as me?"
"Well, Pip," said Joe, taking up the poker and settling himself to his usual occupation, when he was thoughtful, of slowly raking the fire between the lower bars. "I'll tell you. My father, Pip, he were given to drink, and when he were overtook with drink, he hammered away at my mother most unmerciful. It were almost the only hammering he did, indeed, excepting at myself. Consequence, my mother and me, we ran away from my father several times, and she put me to school, but my father were that good in his heart that he couldn't bear to be without us. So he'd come with a most tremendous crowd, and make such a row at the doors of the houses where we was, that they used to be obligated to have no more to do with us, and to give us up to him. And then he took us home and hammered us. Which you see, Pip, said Joe, pausing in his meditative raking of the fire and looking at me, were a drawback on my learning.
Certainly, poor Joe.
Consequence, my father didn't make objections to my going to work. So I went to work at my present calling, which were his too, if he would have followed it, and I worked tolerable hard, I assure you, Pip. In time, I were able to keep him, and I kept him till he went off in a purple leptic fit. My mother weren't long of following, poor soul, and her share of peace come round at last. Joe's blue eyes turned a little watery. He rubbed first one of them and then the other, in a most uncongenial and uncomfortable manner, with the round knob on the end of the poker. It were but lonesome then, living here alone, and I got acquainted with your sister. When I got acquainted with your sister, it were the talk how she was bringing you up by hand. Very kind of her too, all the folks said, and I said along with all the folks. As to you, when I offered to your sister to keep company, and to be asked in church at such times as she was willing and ready to come to the forge, I said to her, and bring the poor little child. God bless the poor little child, I said to your sister. There's room for him at the forge. I broke out crying, and hugged Joe round the neck, who dropped the poker to hug me, and to say, Ever the best of friends, ain't us, Pip? Don't cry, old chap. Mrs. Joe made occasional trips with Uncle Pumblechook on market days to assist him in buying such household stuffs and goods as required a woman's judgment, Uncle Pumblechook being a bachelor and reposing no confidences in his domestic servant. It happened that my sister returned from one of these trips in a state of unusual excitement.
No. If this boy ain't grateful this night, he never will be.
I looked as grateful as any boy possibly could who was wholly uninformed why he ought to assume that expression.
It's only to be hoped that he won't be pumpied.
By this my sister meant pampered.
But I have my fears.
She ain't in that line, Mum,
said Mr. Pumblechook.
She knows better.
She? I looked at Joe, making the motion with my lips and eyebrows. She? Joe looked at me, making the motion with his lips and eyebrows. She? My sister caught him in the act, and said in her snappish way,
Well, what are you staring at? Is the house afire?
Which some individual mentioned. She.
And she is a she, I suppose, unless you call Miss Havisham a he, and I doubt if even you'll go so far as that.
Miss Havisham, uptown?
Is there any Miss Havisham downtown? She wants this boy to go and play there, and of course he's gone, and he had better play there or I'll work him.
I had heard of Miss Havisham uptown. Everybody for miles round had heard of Miss Havisham uptown as an immensely rich and grim lady who lived in a large and dismal house barricaded against robbers, and who led a life of seclusion. Well, to be sure. I wonder how she come to know Pip.
Noodle, who said she knew him?
Which some individual mentioned that she wanted him to go and play there.
And couldn't she ask Uncle Pumblechook if he knew of a boy to go and play there? Isn't it just barely possible that Uncle Pumblechook may be a tenant of hers, and that he may sometimes go there to pay his rent? And couldn't she then ask Uncle Pumblechook if he knew of a boy to go and play there? And couldn't Uncle Pumblechook, being always considerate and thoughtful for us, though you may not think it, Joseph, then mention this boy standing prancing here?
Which I solemnly declare I was not doing.
That I have forever been a willing slave to?
Good,
cried Uncle Pumblechook.
Well put, prettily pointed, good indeed. Now, Joseph, you know the case.
Uncle Pumblechook conducted me to Miss Havisham's the next morning. Miss Havisham's house was built of old brick, and was dismal, and had a great many iron bars to it. There was a courtyard in front, and that was barred, so we had to wait after ringing the bell until someone should come to open it. While we waited at the gate, I peeped in, and saw that at the side of the house there was a large brewery. No brewing was going on in it, and none seemed to have gone on for a long, long time. A window was raised, and a clear voice demanded,
What name?
To which my conductor replied,
Pumblechook.
The voice returned,
Quite right.
and the window was shut again, and a young lady came across the courtyard with keys in her hand.
This,
said Mr. Pumblechook,
is Pip.
This is Pip, is it?
returned the young lady, who was very pretty, and seemed very proud.
Come in, Pip.
Mr. Pumblechook was coming in also when she stopped him with the gate.
Oh, did you wish to see Miss Havisham?
If Miss Havisham wished to see me,
Ah, but you see she doesn't.
The girl said this so finally and in such an undiscussable way that Mr. Pumblechook could not protest. But he eyed me severely and departed with the words reproachfully delivered,
boy, let your behaviour here be a credit unto them which brought you up by hand.
My young conductress locked the gate, and we went across the courtyard.
What is the name of this house, miss?
I asked timidly. The young girl replied,
Satis, which is Greek or Latin or Hebrew, or all three, or all one to me, for enough. Enough House? That's a curious name, miss. Yes, but it means more than it says. It meant, when it was given, that whoever had this house could want nothing else. They must have been easily satisfied in those days, I should think. But don't loiter, boy.
Though she called me boy, and with a carelessness that was far from complimentary, she was of about my own age. She seemed much older than I, of course, being a girl, and beautiful, and self-possessed, and she was as scornful of me as if she had been 21, and a queen. We went into the house by a side door. The great front entrance had 2 chains across it outside, and the first thing I noticed was that the passages were all dark, and that she had left a candle burning there. She took it up, and we went through more passages and up a staircase, and still it was all dark, and only the candle lighted us. At last we came to the door of a room, and she said,
Go in. After you, miss. Don't be ridiculous, boy. I am not going in.
and scornfully she walked away, taking the candle with her. This was very uncomfortable, and I was half afraid. However, the only thing to be done was to knock at the door. I knocked, and was told from within to enter. I entered, therefore, and found myself in a pretty large room, well lighted with wax candles. No glimpse of daylight was to be seen in it. It was a dressing-room. Prominent in it was a fine lady's dressing-table. In an armchair, with an elbow resting on the table, and her head leaning on that hand, sat the strangest lady I have ever seen, or shall ever see. She was dressed in rich materials, satins and lace and silks, all of white. Her shoes were white, and she had a long white veil dependent from her hair, and she had bridal flowers in her hair. But her hair was white. Some bright jewels sparkled on her neck and on her hands, and some other jewels lay sparkling on the table. Dresses, less splendid than the dress she wore, and half-packed trunks were scattered about. She had not quite finished dressing, for she had but one shoe on. The other was on the table near her hand. Her veil was but half arranged, her watch and chain were not put on, and some lace for her bosom lay with those trinkets, and with her handkerchief and gloves, and some flowers and a prayer-book, all confusedly heaped about the looking-glass. But I saw that everything within my view which ought to be white had been white long ago, and had lost its lustre, and was faded and yellow. I saw that the bride within the bridal dress had withered like the dress, and like the flowers, and had no brightness left but the brightness of her sunken eyes. I saw that the dress had been put upon the rounded figure of a young woman, and that the figure upon which it now hung loose had shrunk to skin and bone. The figure seemed to have dark eyes that moved and looked at me. I should have cried out if I could.
Who is it?
Pip, ma'am.
Pip?
Mr. Pumblechook's boy, ma'am. Come to play.
Come nearer. Let me look at you. Come close.
It was when I stood before her, avoiding her eyes, that I saw that her watch had stopped at 20 minutes to 9, and that a clock in the room had stopped at 20 minutes to 9.
Look at me.
You are not afraid of a woman who has never seen the sun since you were born?
No. Do you know what I touch here?
She asked, laying her hands one upon the other on her left side.
Yes, ma'am.
What do I touch?
Your heart.
Broken!
She kept her hands there for a little while, and slowly took them away as if they were heavy.
I am tired. I want diversion, and I have done with men and women. Play.
She could hardly have directed a more unfortunate boy to do anything in the wide world more difficult to be done under the circumstances.
There! Play! Play! Play!
But I only stood looking at Miss Havisham, in what I suppose she took for a dogged manner, inasmuch as she said,
Are you sullen and obstinate?
No, ma'am. I am very sorry for you, and very sorry I can't play just now. If you complain of me, I shall get into trouble with my sister, so I would do it if I could. But it's so new here, and so strange, and so fine, and melancholy.
I stopped, fearing I might say too much. Before she spoke again, she turned her eyes from me, and looked at the dress she wore, and at the dressing-table, and finally at herself in the looking-glass.
So new to him, so old to me, so strange to him, so familiar to me, so melancholy to both of us. Call Estella. You can do that. Call Estella. At the door.
She answered at last, and her light came along the dark passage, like a star.
My dear, let me see you play cards with this boy.
With this boy? Why, he is a common labouring boy.
Well, you can break his heart.
What do you play, boy?
Nothing but beggar my neighbour, miss. Beggar him,
said Miss Havisham to Estella. So we sat down to cards. Miss Havisham sat corpse-like as we played.
He calls the knaves jacks, this boy,
said Estella with disdain before our first game was out.
And what coarse hands he has, and what thick boots.
I had never thought of being ashamed of my hands before, but I began to consider them a very indifferent pair. Her contempt for me was so strong that it became infectious, and I caught it.
You say nothing of her,
remarked Miss Havisham to me as she looked on.
She says many hard things of you, but you say nothing of her. What do you think of her?
I don't like to say.
Tell me in my ear.
I think she is very proud.
Anything else?
I think she is very pretty.
Anything else?
I think she is very insulting.
Anything else?
I think I should like to go home.
And never see her again, though she is so pretty?
I'm not sure that I shouldn't like to see her again, but I should like to go home now.
You shall go soon. Play the game out.
I played the game to an end with Estella, and she beggared me. She threw the cards down on the table when she had won them all, as if she despised them for having been one of me. Miss Havisham said,
When shall I have you here again? Let me think.
I was beginning to remind her that today was Wednesday when she checked me.
There. I know nothing of days of the week. I know nothing of weeks of the year. Come again after 6 days. You hear?
Yes, ma'am.
Estella, take him down.
I followed the candle down as I had followed the candle up. Estella let me out with her keys. She gave me a triumphant glance, as if she rejoiced that my hands were so coarse and my boots were so thick, and she opened the gate and stood holding it. I was passing out without looking at her, when she touched me with a taunting hand.
Why don't you cry?
Because I don't want to.
You do? You are near crying now.
She laughed contemptuously, pushed me out, and locked the gate upon me. At the appointed day I returned to Miss Havisham's, and my hesitating ring at the gate again brought out Estella.
You are to come this way today?
and she took me to quite another part of the house. We went into a gloomy room with a low ceiling. There was some company in the room, and Estella said to me as she joined it,
"You are to go and stand there, boy, till you are wanted."
There, being the window, I crossed to it, and stood there, in a very uncomfortable state of mind, looking out. There were 3 ladies in the room and 1 gentleman. Before I'd been standing at the window 5 minutes, they somehow conveyed to me that they were all toadies and humbugs, but that each of them pretended not to know that the others were toadies and humbugs. As they spoke among themselves behind me, I learned that their names were Miss Sarah Pocket, Georgiana, Camilla, and Cousin Raymond, who was the husband of Camilla. The ringing of a distant bell, combined with the echoing of some cry along the passage, interrupted their conversation, and caused Estella to say to me,
"Now, boy."
On my turning round, they all looked at me with the utmost contempt, and as I went out, I heard Sarah Pocket say,
"Well, I'm sure. What next?"
and Camilla add, with indignation,
Was there ever such a fancy? The idea!
As we were going with our candle along the dark passage, Estella stopped all of a sudden, and facing round, said in her taunting manner, with her face quite close to mine,
"Well?" "Well, miss? Am I pretty?" "Yes, I think you are very pretty." "Am I insulting?" "Not so much as you were last time." "Not so much so?" "No."
She slapped my face when I answered.
"Now, you little coarse monster, what do you think of me now?" "I shall not tell you." "Because you're going to tell upstairs, is that it?" "No, that's not it." "Why don't you cry again, you little wretch?" "Because I'll never cry for you again,"
said I, which was, looking back, as false a declaration as ever was made. We went on our way upstairs after this episode, and as we were going up, we met a gentleman groping his way down. "Ah, whom have we here?"
"A boy."
He was a burly man of an exceedingly dark complexion, with an exceedingly large head and corresponding large hand. "Boy of the neighbourhood, eh?"
"Yes, sir."
"How do you come here?"
"Miss Havisham sent for me, sir."
"Well, behave yourself. I have a pretty large experience of boys, and you're a bad set of fellows. Now mind." Estella left me standing near the door, and I stood there until Miss Havisham cast her eyes upon me from the dressing-table.
"So, the days have worn away, have they?"
"Yes, ma'am. Today is—"
There. I don't want to know. Since this house strikes you old and grave, boy, and you are unwilling to play, are you willing to work?
I said I was quite willing.
Then go into that opposite room and wait there till I come.
I crossed the staircase landing and entered the room she indicated. It was spacious, and I dare say had once been handsome, but every discernible thing in it was covered with dust and mould, and dropping to pieces. The most prominent object was a long table with a tablecloth spread on it, as if a feast had been in preparation when the house and the clocks all stopped together. An épingle, or centrepiece of some kind, was in the middle of this cloth. It was so heavily overhung with cobwebs that its form was quite indistinguishable. And as I looked along the yellow expanse, out of which I remember it seeming to grow like a black fungus, I saw speckled-legged spiders with blotchy bodies running in and out of it. I was watching them from a distance when Miss Havisham laid a hand upon my shoulder. In her other hand she had a crutch-headed stick on which she leaned, and she looked like the witch of the place. She pointed to the long table with her stick.
"This is where I will be laid when I am dead. They shall come and look at me here."
I shrank under her touch. Again pointing with her stick, she asked me,
"What do you think that is? That where those cobwebs are?"
"I can't guess what it is, ma'am."
"It's a great cake. A bride cake.
"Mine!"
She looked all round the room in a glaring manner, and then said, leaning on me while her hand twitched my shoulder,
Come. Walk me.
I made out from this that the work I had to do was to walk Miss Havisham round and round the room. Accordingly, I started at once, and she leaned upon my shoulder, and we went away at a fitful pace. At last she stopped before the fire and said, after muttering and looking at it for some seconds,
"This is my birthday, Pip."
I was going to wish her many happy returns when she lifted her stick.
"I don't suffer it to be spoken of. On this day of the year, long before you were born, this heap of decay was brought here. It and I have worn away together. The mice have gnawed at it, and sharper teeth than teeth of mice have gnawed at me. When the ruin is complete, and when they lay me dead in my bride's dress on the bride's table, which shall be done, and which will be the finished curse upon him, so much the better if it is done on this day."
She stood there, looking at the table as if she already saw her own figure lying there. I remained quiet. Estella returned, and she too remained quiet. At length, not coming out of her distraught state by degrees, but in an instant, Miss Havisham said,
"Let me see you two play cards. Why have you not begun?"
With that we returned to her room and sat down as before. I was beggared as before, and again as before Miss Havisham watched us all the time, directed my attention to Estella's beauty, and made me notice it the more by trying her jewels on Estella's breast and hair. Estella, for her part, likewise treated me as before, except that she did not condescend to speak. When we had played some half-dozen games, a day was appointed for my return, and I was taken down into the yard, to be left to wander about as I liked for a while. When I had exhausted the garden and a greenhouse with nothing in it but a fallen-down grapevine and some bottles, I found myself, to my great surprise, exchanging a broad stare with a pale young gentleman with red eyelids and light hair, who said, "Hello, young fellow." I said,
"Hello."
Politely omitting young fellow. "Who let you in?"
"Miss Estella."
"Who gave you leave to prowl about?"
"Miss Estella."
"Come and fight." What could I do but follow him? I have often asked myself the question since, but what else could I do? My heart failed me when I saw him squaring at me with every demonstration of mechanical nicety, and eyeing my anatomy as if he were minutely choosing his bone. I never have been so surprised in my life as I was when I let out the first blow, and saw him lying on his back, looking up at me with a bloody nose, and his face exceedingly foreshortened. But he was on his feet directly, and after sponging himself with a great show of dexterity, began squaring again. His spirit inspired me with great respect. He seemed to have no strength, and he never once hit me hard, and he was always knocked down, but he would be up again in a moment, sponging himself or drinking out of the water bottle, with the greatest satisfaction in seconding himself according to form, and then came at me with an air and a show that made me believe he really was going to do for me at last. He got heavily bruised, for I am sorry to record that the more I hit him, the harder I hit him. But he came up again and again and again, until at last he got a bad fall with the back of his head against the wall. Even after that crisis in our affairs, he got up and turned round and round confusedly a few times, not knowing where I was, but finally went on his knees to his sponge and threw it up, at the same time panting out, "Ah, that means you have won." I said,
"Can I help you?"
And he said, "No, thank ye." And I said,
"Good afternoon."
And he said, "Same to you." When I got into the courtyard, I found Estella waiting with the keys, but she neither asked me where I had been nor why I had kept her waiting, and there was a bright flush upon her face, as though something had happened to delight her. Instead of going straight to the gate with me, she stepped into the passage and beckoned me.
"Come here. You may kiss me, if you like."
I kissed her cheek as she turned it to me. I think I would have gone through a great deal to kiss her cheek, but I felt that the kiss was given to the coarse common boy, as a piece of money might have been, and that it was worth nothing. When I next returned to Satis House, my late struggle was not alluded to in any way, and no pale young gentleman was to be discovered on the premises. On the broad landing between Miss Havisham's own room and that other room in which the long table was laid out, I saw a garden chair, a light chair on wheels that you pushed from behind. It had been placed there since my last visit, and I entered the same day on a regular occupation of pushing Miss Havisham in this chair, when she was tired of walking with her hand upon my shoulder, round her own room, and across the landing and round the other room. Over and over and over again we would make these journeys, and sometimes they would last as long as 3 hours at a stretch. I insensibly fall into a general mention of these journeys as numerous, because it was at once settled that I should return every alternate day at noon for these purposes, and because these activities covered a period of at least 8 or 10 months. As we began to be more used to one another, Miss Havisham talked more to me, and asked me such questions as what I had learnt, and what I was going to be. I told her I was going to be apprenticed to Joe, I believed, and I enlarged upon my knowing nothing and wanting to know everything, in the hope that she might offer some help towards that desirable end. But she did not. On the contrary, she seemed to prefer my being ignorant. Neither did she ever give me any money, or anything but my daily dinner, nor even stipulate that I should be paid for my services. Estella was always about, and always let me in and out, but never told me I might kiss her again. Miss Havisham would often ask me, in a whisper,
"Does she grow prettier and prettier, Pip?"
And when I said yes, for indeed she did, would seem to enjoy it greedily. What could I become with these surroundings? How could my character fail to be influenced by them? Is it to be wondered at if my thoughts were dazed, as my eyes were, when I came out into the natural light from the misty yellow rooms? We went on in this way for a long time, and it seemed likely that we should continue to go on in this way for a long time, when one day Miss Havisham stopped short as she and I were walking, she leaning on my shoulder, and said with some displeasure,
"You are growing tall, Pip."
I thought it best to hint through the medium of a meditative look that this might be occasioned by circumstances over which I had no control.
"Tell me the name again of that blacksmith of yours."
"Joe Gargery, ma'am."
"Meaning the master you were to be apprenticed to?"
"Yes, Miss Havisham."
"Then you had better be apprenticed at once."
It is a most miserable thing to feel ashamed of home. But after my time spent at Sattie's house, it was what I felt. Home had never been a very pleasant place to me because of my sister's temper, but Joe had sanctified it, and I had believed in it. I had believed in the forge as the glowing road to manhood and independence. Within a single year all this was changed. Now it was all coarse and common, and I would not have had Miss Havisham and Estella see it on any account. Now Joe kept a journeyman at weekly wages, whose name was Orlick. He lodged at a sluice-keeper's out on the marshes, and on working days would come slouching from his hermitage with his hands in his pockets, and his dinner loosely tied in a bundle round his neck. This morose journeyman had never any liking for me. When I became Joe's apprentice, Orlick was perhaps confirmed in some suspicion that I should displace him, howbeit he liked me still less. Orlick was at work and present one day when I reminded Joe of my half-holiday.
"Now, master, surely you're not going to favour only one of us. If young Pip has half-holiday, do as much for old Orlick."
I suppose he was about 25, but he usually spoke of himself as an ancient person.
"Why, what'll you do with a half-holiday if I give it?" "What'll I do with it? What'll he do with it? I'll do as much with it as him," said Orlick.
"As to Pip, he's going uptown," said Joe.
"Well then, as to old Orlick, he's going uptown. Two can go uptown. 'Tain't only one what can go uptown."
"Don't lose your temper."
"Shall if I like. Some, and they're uptowning. Now, master, come. No favouring in this shop. Be a man."
Joe pondered this, and said,
"Then, as in general you stick to your work as well as most men, let it be a half-holiday for all."
My sister had been standing silent in the yard, within hearing. She was a most unscrupulous spy and listener, and she instantly looked in at one of the windows.
"You fool! Giving holidays to great idle hulkers like that?"
Before Joe could answer, the journeyman growled,
"You're a foul shrew, Mother Gargery."
"What did you say? What did you say? What did that fellow Orlick say to me, Pip? What did he call me with my husband standing by? Oh, Oh! Oh!
What could the wretched Joe do now but stand up to his journeyman and ask him what he meant by interfering betwixt himself and Mrs. Joe, and further whether he was man enough to come on? They went at one another like two giants, but if any man in that neighbourhood could stand up long against Joe, I never saw the man. Orlick, as if he had been of no more account than the pale young gentleman, was very soon among the coal dust, and in no hurry to come out of it. I went upstairs to dress myself. When I rang the bell of Satis house, Miss Sarah Pocket came to the gate. No Estella.
How then? You here again? What do you want?
When I said that I only came to see how Miss Havisham was, Sarah evidently deliberated whether or not she should send me about my business. But unwilling to hazard the responsibility, she let me in, and presently brought the sharp message that I was to come up. Everything was unchanged, and Miss Havisham was alone.
Well, I hope you want nothing. You'll get nothing.
No, indeed, Miss Havisham. I only wanted you to know that I'm doing very well in my apprenticeship, and I'm always much obliged to you.
There, there. Come now and then. Come on your birthday. Aye, you are looking round for Estella, eh?
I had been looking round, in fact, for Estella, and I stammered that I hoped she was well.
Abroad, educating for a lady, far out of reach, prettier than ever, admired by all who see her. Do you feel that you have lost her?
There was such a malignant enjoyment in her utterance of the last words, and she broke into such a disagreeable laugh, that I was at a loss what to say. She spared me the trouble of considering by dismissing me. When the gate was closed upon me by Sarah, I felt more than ever dissatisfied with my home, and with my trade, and with everything. As I was loitering along the high street, looking in disconsolately at the shop windows, and thinking what I would buy if I were a gentleman, who should come out of the bookshop but Mr. Wopsle. Mr. Wopsle had in his hand the affecting tragedy of George Barnwell, in which he had that moment invested sixpence, with the view of heaping every word of it on the head of Pumblechook, with whom he was going to drink tea. No sooner did he see me than he appeared to consider that a special providence had put a prentice in his way to be read at, and he laid hold of me, and insisted on my accompanying him to the Pumblechookian parlour. As I knew it would be miserable at home, and as the nights were dark and the way was dreary, and almost any companionship on the road was better than none, I made no great resistance. Consequently, we turned into Pumblechook's just as the street and the shops were lighting up. It was a very dark night when I set out with Mr. Wopsle on the walk home. Beyond town it fell wet and thick. We came upon a man slouching under the lee of the turnpike house. "Hello? Orlick there?" "Ah, I was standing by a minute, on the chance of company."
"You're late,"
I remarked. Orlick, not unnaturally, answered, "Well, and you're late." "We have been," said Mr. Wopsle, exalted with his late performance, "we have been indulging, Mr. Orlick, in an intellectual evening." Old Orlick growled as if he had nothing to say about that, and we all went on together. I asked him presently whether he had been spending his half-holiday up and down town.
"Yes, all of it. I come in behind yourself. I didn't see you, but I must have been pretty close behind you. By the by, the guns is going again."
"At the hulks?"
"Aye. There's some of the birds flown from the cages. A good night for cutting off in."
Thus we came to the village. The way by which we approached it took us past the Three Jolly Bargemen, which we were surprised to find, it being 11 o'clock, in a state of commotion, with the door wide open and unwonted lights scattered about. Mr. Wopsle dropped in to ask what was the matter, surmising that a convict had been taken, but came running out in a great hurry. "There's something wrong up at your place, Pip. Run all!"
"What is it?"
I asked of Mr. Wopsle as we ran. "I can't quite understand. The house seems to have been violently entered when Joe Gargery was out, supposed by convicts. Somebody has been attacked and hurt." We made no stop until we got into our kitchen. It was full of people, and there was a surgeon, and there was Joe, and there was a group of women all on the floor in the midst of the kitchen. The unemployed bystanders drew back when they saw me, and so I became aware of my sister, lying without sense or movement on the bare boards where she had been knocked down by a tremendous blow on the back of the head, dealt by some unknown hand, when her face was turned towards the fire, destined never to be on the rampage again, while she was the wife of Joe. Joe had been at the Three Jolly Bargemen smoking his pipe from 8:15 o'clock to 10:15. While he was there, my sister had been seen standing at the kitchen door, and had exchanged good night with a farm labourer going home. The man could not be more particular as to the time at which he saw her, he got into dense confusion when he tried to be, than that it must have been before 9. When Joe went home at 5 minutes before 10, he found her struck down on the floor, and promptly called in assistance. But there was one remarkable piece of evidence on the spot. She had been struck with something blunt and heavy, on the head and spine, and on the ground beside her, when Joe picked her up, was a convict's leg iron, which had been filed asunder. Now Joe, examining this iron with a smithy's eye, declared it to have been filed asunder some time ago. The hue and cry going off to the hulks, and people coming thence to examine the iron, Joe's opinion was corroborated. Knowing what I knew, I set up an inference of my own here. I believed the iron to be my convict's iron, the iron I had seen and heard him filing at on the marshes, but my mind did not accuse him of having put it to its latest use. My sister lay very ill in bed. Her sight was disturbed, and her speech was unintelligible. We were at a loss to find a suitable attendant for her, until we thought of Biddy, and soon she became a part of our establishment. She was a blessing to Joe, for the dear old fellow was sadly cut up by the constant contemplation of the wreck of his wife, and had been accustomed, while attending on her of an evening, to turn to me every now and then, and say, with his blue eyes moistened, "Such a fine figure of a woman, as she once were, Pip." I now fell into a regular routine of apprenticeship life. My sister was never left alone now, but Joe more than readily undertook the care of her on a Sunday afternoon, and Biddy and I went out together. It was summer-time, and lovely weather. We came to the riverside and sat down on the bank, with the water rippling at our feet. I resolved that it was a good time and place for the admission of Biddy into my inner confidence. "Biddy, I want to be a gentleman."
Oh, I wouldn't if I was you. I don't think it would answer.
"Biddy, I have particular reasons for wanting to be a gentleman."
Well, you know best, Pip, but don't you think you are happier as you are?
"Biddy, I'm not at all happy as I am. I am disgusted with my calling, with my life. I've never taken to either since I was bound."
That's a pity.
If I could have settled down, and been but half as fond of the forge as I was when I was little, I know it would have been much better for me. You and I and Joe would have wanted nothing then, and Joe and I would perhaps have gone partners when I was out of my time, and I might even have grown to keep company with you, and we might have sat on this very bank on a fine Sunday, quite different people. I should have been good enough for you, shouldn't I, Biddy?" Biddy sighed as she looked at the ships sailing on.
Yes, I'm not over particular.
"Instead of that, see how I'm going on, dissatisfied and uncomfortable, and what would it signify to me being coarse and common if nobody had told me so?" Biddy turned her face suddenly towards mine, and looked far more attentively at me than she had looked at the sailing ships.
It was neither a very true nor a very polite thing to say. Who said it?
"The beautiful young lady at Miss Avisham's, and she's more beautiful than anybody ever was, and I admire her dreadfully, and I want to be a gentleman on her account."
Do you want to be a gentleman to spite her, or to gain her over?
"I don't know."
Because if it is to spite her, I should think, but you know best, that might be better and more independently done by caring nothing for her words. And if it is to gain her over, I should think, but you know best, she was not worth gaining over.
Biddy was the wisest of girls, and she tried to reason no more with me.
I am glad of one thing, and that is that you have felt you could give me your confidence, Pip.
"Oh, Biddy, I shall always tell you everything."
Till you're a gentleman.
As we rose to return home, there started up from the rushes, or from the ooze, which was quite in his stagnant way, old Orlick.
"Hello, where are you two going?"
Where should we be going but home?
Well then, I'm jiggered if I don't see you home.
Biddy was much against his going with us, and said to me in a whisper,
Don't let him come. I don't like him.
As I did not like him either, I took the liberty of saying that we thanked him, but we didn't want seeing home. He received that piece of information with a yell of laughter and dropped back, but came slouching after us at a little distance. I asked Biddy why she did not like him. She replied, glancing over her shoulder as he slouched after us,
Oh, because I am afraid he likes me.
I was very hot indeed upon old Orlick's daring to admire her, as hot as if it were an outrage on myself. I don't like it, Biddy. I don't approve of it.
Nor I neither, though that makes no difference to you.
It was in the 4th year of my apprenticeship to Joe, and it was a Saturday night. There was a group assembled round the fire at the Three Jolly Bargemen. I became aware of a strange gentleman leaning over the back of the settle opposite me, looking on. There was an expression of contempt on his face, and he bit the side of a great forefinger as he watched the group of faces. Then the strange gentleman, with an air of authority not to be disputed, left the back of the settle and came into the space between the 2 settles in front of the fire, where he remained standing. He looked around at us, as we all quailed before him.
From information I have received, I have reason to believe there is a blacksmith among you, by name Joseph or Joe Gargery. Which is the man?
Joe answered,
Here is the man.
The strange gentleman beckoned him out of his place, and Joe went.
You have an apprentice, commonly known as Pip. Is he here?
I'm here. The stranger did not recognize me, but I recognized him as the gentleman I had met on the stairs on the occasion of my second visit to Miss Havisham.
I wish to have a private conference with you two. It will take a little time. Perhaps we had better go to your place of residence.
Amidst a wondering silence, we 3 walked out of the Jolly Bargemen, and in a wondering silence walked home. Joe went on ahead to open the front door. Our conference was held in the state parlour, which was feebly lighted by 1 candle.
My name is Jaggers, and I am a lawyer in London. Now, Joseph Gargery, I am the bearer of an offer to relieve you of this young fellow, your apprentice. You would not object to cancel his indentures at his request and for his good? You would want nothing for so doing?
Lord forbid that I should want anything for not standing in Pip's way.
Very well. Recollect the admission you have made, and don't try to go from it presently.
Who's a-going to try?
I don't say anybody is. Now I return to this young fellow, and the communication I have got to make is that he has great expectations.
Joe and I gasped and looked at one another.
I am instructed to communicate to him, said Mr. Jaggers, throwing his finger at me sideways, that he will come into a handsome property. Further, that it is the desire of the present possessor of that property that he be immediately removed from his present sphere of life and from this place, and be brought up as a gentleman. In a word, as a young fellow of great expectations.
My dream was out. My wild fancy was surpassed by sober reality. Miss Havisham was going to make my fortune on a grand scale.
Now, Mr. Pip, I address the rest of what I have to say to you. You are to understand, first, that it is the request of the person from whom I take my instructions that you always bear the name of Pip. Secondly, that the name of the person who is your liberal benefactor remains a profound secret until the person chooses to reveal it. That may be years hence, and you are most positively prohibited from making any inquiry on this head. Your observance of this is binding. The secret is solely held by that person and by me. Now, Mr. Pip, there is already lodged in my hands a sum of money amply sufficient for your suitable education and maintenance. You will please consider me your guardian. Am I answered that you are ready to be placed at once under some proper tutor?
I stammered, yes.
Good. Now, there is a certain tutor of whom I have some knowledge, who I think might suit the purpose. The gentleman I speak of is one Mr. Matthew Pocket.
Ah, I caught at the name directly. Miss Havisham's relations.
You know the name?
My answer was that I had heard of the name.
Good. You had better see him in his own house. The way shall be prepared for you, and you can see his son first, who is in London. When will you come to London? You should have some new clothes to come in, and they should not be working clothes. Say this day week. You'll want some money. Shall I leave you 20 guineas?
He produced a long purse with the greatest coolness, and counted them out on the table and pushed them over to me, but was meanwhile eyeing Joe.
Well, Joseph Gargery, you look dumbfounded.
I am.
It was understood that you wanted nothing for yourself, remember?
It were understood, and it are understood, and it ever will be similar according.
Oh, dear, good Joe, whom I was so ready to leave and so unthankful to. I see you again with your muscular blacksmith's arm before your eyes, and your broad chest heaving, and your voice dying away. Oh, dear, good, faithful Joe. Jaggers left, but something came into my head which induced me to run after him as he was going down to the Jolly Bargeman where he had left a hired carriage.
I beg your pardon, Mr. Jaggers.
Hello? What's the matter?
I wish to be quite right, Mr. Jaggers, and to keep to your directions, so I thought I'd better ask, would there be any objection to my taking leave of anyone I know about here before I go away?
No.
I don't mean in the village only, but uptown?
No. No objection.
I thanked him and ran home again, and there I found that Joe had already locked the front door and vacated the state parlour, and was seated by the kitchen fire with a hand on each knee, gazing intently at the burning coals. My sister was in her cushioned chair in her corner, and Biddy sat at her needlework before the fire, and Joe sat next Biddy, and I sat next Joe in the corner opposite my sister. The more I looked into the glowing coals, the more incapable I became of looking at Joe. The longer the silence lasted, the more unable I felt to speak. At length I got out, "Joe, have you told Biddy?" "No, Pip. Which I left yourself, Pip." "I would rather you told Joe."
Pip's a gentleman of fortune, then, and God bless him in it.
Biddy dropped her work and looked at me. Joe held his knees and looked at me. I looked at both of them. After a pause, they both heartily congratulated me, but there was a certain touch of sadness in their congratulations that I rather resented. I soon exchanged an affectionate good night with Biddy and Joe, and went up to bed. When I got into my little room, I sat down and took a long look at it, as a mean little room that I should soon be parted from, and raised above for ever. I put my light out and crept into bed, and it was an uneasy bed now, and I never slept the old sound sleep in it any more. Sarah Pocket came to the gate of Satis, and positively reeled back when she saw me so changed in my new clothes.
You? You? Good gracious! What do you want?
"I'm going to London, Miss Pocket. I want to say good-bye to Miss Havisham." Miss Havisham was taking exercise in the room with the long spread table, leaning on her crutch stick. The room was lighted as of yore, and at the sound of our entrance she stopped and turned. She was then just abreast of the rotted bride-cake.
Don't go, Sarah. Well, Pip?
"I start for London, Miss Havisham, tomorrow, and I thought you would kindly not mind my taking leave of you."
This is a gay figure, Pip.
She made her crutch stick play round me, as if she, the fairy godmother who had changed me, were bestowing the finishing gift. "I have come into such good fortune since I saw you last, Miss Havisham, and I'm so grateful for it, Miss Havisham." She looked at the discomfited and envious Sarah with delight.
I have seen Mr. Jaggers. I have heard about it, Pip. So you go tomorrow?
"Yes, Miss Havisham."
And you are adopted by a rich person?
"Yes, Miss Havisham."
Not named?
"No, Miss Havisham."
And Mr. Jaggers is made your guardian?
"Yes, Miss Havisham." She quite gloated on these questions and answers, so keen was her enjoyment of Sarah Pocket's jealous dismay.
Well, you have a promising career before you. Be good, deserve it, and abide by Mr. Jaggers' instructions.
She looked at me and looked at Sarah, and Sarah's countenance wrung out of her watchful face a cruel smile.
Goodbye, Pip. You will always keep the name of Pip, you know.
Yes, Miss Havisham.
Goodbye, Pip.
She stretched out her hand. I went down upon my knee and put her hand to my lips. She looked at Sarah Pocket with triumph in her weird eyes. And so I left my fairy godmother, with both her hands on her stick, standing in the midst of the dimly lighted room, beside the rotten bride-cake that was hidden in cobwebs. As the 6 evenings dwindled away to 5, to 4, to 3, to 2, I had become more and more appreciative of the society of Joe and Biddy. On this last evening I dressed myself out in my new clothes for their delight, and sat in my splendour until bedtime. We were all very low, and none the higher for pretending to be in spirits. I was to leave our village at 5 in the morning, carrying my little hand portmanteau, and I had told Joe that I wished to walk away all alone. All night there were coaches in my broken sleep, going to wrong places instead of to London. It was a hurried breakfast with no taste in it. I got up from the meal, saying, with a sort of briskness, as if it had only just occurred to me, "Well, I suppose I must be off." And then I kissed my sister, who was laughing and nodding and shaking in her usual chair, and kissed Biddy, and threw my arms around Joe's neck. Then I took up my little portmanteau and walked out. The last I saw of them was when I presently heard a scuffle behind me, and looking back saw Joe throwing an old shoe after me, and Biddy throwing another old shoe. I stopped then to wave my hat, and dear old Joe waved his strong right arm above his head, crying huskily, "Hurrah!" and Biddy put her apron to her face. I walked away at a good pace, thinking it was easier to go than I had supposed it would be, and reflecting that it would never have done to have had an old shoe thrown after the coach in sight of all the High Street. I whistled and made nothing of going. But the village was very peaceful and quiet, and the light mists were solemnly rising, as if to show me the world, and I had been so innocent and little there, and all beyond was so unknown and great, that in a moment, with a strong heave and sob, I broke into tears. I was better after I had cried than before, more sorry, more aware of my own ingratitude, more gentle. If I had cried before, I should have had Joe with me then. The journey from our town to the metropolis was a journey of about 5 hours. Mr. Jaggers had duly sent me his address. It was Little Britain, just out of Smithfield. In a gloomy street I found his offices with an open door, whereon was painted Mr. Jaggers. I went into the front office with my little portmanteau in my hand, and asked of the clerk, was Mr. Jaggers at home? "He is not. He is in court at present." "Am I addressing Mr. Pip?" I signified that he was addressing Mr. Pip. "Mr. Jaggers left word would you wait in his room. He couldn't say how long he might be, having a case on, but it stands to reason, his time being valuable, that he won't be longer than he can help." With those words the clerk opened a door and ushered me into an inner chamber at the back. Presently my guardian arrived, and informed me what arrangements he had made for me. I was to go to Barnard's Inn, to young Mr. Pocket's rooms, where a bed had been sent in for my accommodation. I was to remain with young Mr. Pocket until Monday. On Monday I was to go with him to his father's house on a visit, that I might try how I liked it. Also I was told what my allowance was to be. It was a very liberal one.
"Of course you'll go wrong somehow, but that's no fault of mine."
He said I was near my destination, and Wemmick should walk round with me, if I pleased. I then found that Wemmick was the clerk in the next room. In the light of day I found him to be a dry man, rather short in stature, with a square wooden face, whose expression seemed to have been imperfectly chipped out with a dull-edged chisel. He had glittering eyes, small, keen, and black, and thin, wide, mottled lips. He had had them, to the best of my belief, from 40 to 50 years. I had supposed Barnard's Inn to be an hotel kept by Mr. Barnard. I now found Barnard to be a disembodied spirit or a fiction, and his inn the dingiest collection of shabby buildings ever squeezed together in a rank corner as a club for tomcats. The windows of the sets of chambers into which those houses were divided were in every stage of dilapidated blind and curtain, crippled flower-pot, cracked glass, dusty decay, and miserable makeshift. So imperfect was this realization of the first of my great expectations that I looked in dismay at Wemmick. "Ah," said he, mistaking me, "the retirement reminds you of the country. So it does me." He led me into a corner and conducted me up a flight of stairs to a set of chambers on the top floor. Mr. Pocket, Junior, was painted on the door, and there was a label on the letterbox, "Return shortly." "He hardly thought you'd come so soon. You don't want me any more?" "Oh, no, thank you." "As I keep the cash, we shall most likely meet pretty often. Good day." "Good day." Mr. Pocket, Junior's idea of shortly was not mine, for I had waited for half an hour before I heard footsteps on the stairs. Gradually there arose before me a member of society of about my own standing. "Mr. Pip? Mr. Pocket?" I felt as if my eyes must start out of my head, and as if this must be a dream. Then I saw the starting appearance come into his own eyes, that I knew to be in mine, and he said, falling back, "Lord bless me! You're the prowling boy. And you are the pale young gentleman." The pale young gentleman and I stood contemplating one another until we both burst out laughing. "Ha! The idea of its being you! The idea of its being you!" And then we contemplated one another afresh, and laughed again. "Well, you hadn't come into your good fortune at that time." No. I heard it had happened very lately. I was rather on the lookout for good fortune then." "Indeed?" "Yes. Miss Havisham had sent for me, since my father was her cousin, to see if she could take a fancy to me. But she couldn't. She had sent for me on a trial visit, and if I had come out of it successfully, I suppose I should have been provided for. Perhaps I should have been, what you may call it, to Estella." "Oh, what's that?" "Betrothed, engaged, what's his name? Any word of that sort." "How did you bear your disappointment?" "Oh, I didn't care much for it. She's a Tartar." "Miss Havisham?" "I don't say no to that, but I meant Estella. That girl has been brought up by Miss Havisham to wreak revenge on all the male sex." "What relation is she to Miss Havisham?" "None, only adopted." "Why should she wreak revenge on all the male sex?" "What revenge?" "Lord, Mr. Pip, don't you know?" "No." "Dear me, it's quite a story, and shall be saved till dinner-time." Herbert Pocket had a frank and easy way with him that was very taking. He was still a pale young gentleman, and had a certain conquered languor about him in the midst of his spirits and briskness. He had not a handsome face, but it was better than handsome, being extremely amiable and cheerful. I was conscious that he carried off his rather old clothes much better than I carried off my new suit. Over our dinner the young Mr. Pocket said, "Will you do me the favour to begin at once to call me by my Christian name, Herbert?" I thanked him and said I would. I informed him in exchange that my Christian name was Philip. "Oh, I don't take to Philip. I tell you what I should like. We are so harmonious, and you have been a blacksmith. Would you mind it?" "I shouldn't mind anything that you propose, but I don't understand you." "Would you mind Handel for a familiar name? There's a charming piece of music by Handel called The Harmonious Blacksmith." "I should like it very much." It was a nice little dinner, seemed to me then a very Lord Mayor's feast, and it acquired additional relish from being eaten under those independent circumstances, with no old people by, and with London all around us. We had made some progress when I reminded Herbert of his promise to tell me about Miss Havisham. "True. I'll redeem it at once. Let me introduce the topic, Handel, by mentioning that in London it is not the custom to put the knife in the mouth for fear of accidents, and that while the fork is reserved for that use, it is not put further in than necessary. It is scarcely worth mentioning, only it's as well to do as other people do. Now, concerning Miss Havisham, her father was a country gentleman down in your part of the world, and was a brewer. Mr. Havisham was very rich and very proud. So was his daughter." "Miss Havisham was an only child?" "No, she had a half-brother. Her father privately married again his cook, I rather think. As the son grew a young man, he turned out riotous, extravagant, undutiful, altogether bad. At last his father disinherited him, but he softened when he was dying and left him well off, though not nearly so well off as Miss Havisham. She was now an heiress, and you may suppose was looked after as a great match. There appeared upon the scene, say at the races or the public balls or anywhere else you like, a certain man who made love to Miss Havisham. Well, this man pursued her closely and professed to be so devoted to her. I believe she'd not shown much susceptibility up to that time, but all the susceptibility she possessed certainly came out then, and she passionately loved him. He practised on her affection in that systematic way that he got great sums of money from her, and he induced her to buy her brother out of a share in the brewery, which had been weakly left him by his father, at an immense price, on the plea that when he was her husband, he must hold and manage it all. Your guardian was not at that time in Miss Havisham's counsels, and she was too haughty and too much in love to be advised by anyone. Her relations were poor and scheming, with the exception of my father. He was poor enough, but not time-serving or jealous. The only independent one among them, he warned her that she was doing too much for this man, and was placing herself too unreservedly in his power. She took the first opportunity of angrily ordering my father out of the house, and my father has never seen her since. To return to the man and make an end of him, the marriage day was fixed, the wedding dresses were bought, the wedding tour was planned out, the wedding guests were invited, the day came, but not the bridegroom. He wrote her a letter, which she received when she was dressing for her marriage, at 20 minutes to 9, at the hour and minute at which she afterwards stopped all the clocks. When she learned that he broke the marriage off, she laid the whole place waste as you've seen it, and she has never since looked upon the light of day. Is that all the story? All I know of it, except to say that it has been supposed that the man to whom she gave her misplaced confidence acted throughout in concert with her half-brother, that it was a conspiracy between them, and they shared the profits. What became of the two men? Are they alive now? I don't know. We were very gay and sociable that night, and I asked Herbert in the course of conversation what he was. He replied, "A capitalist, an insurer of ships in the city." Quite overpowered by the magnificence of this occupation, I asked him where the ships he insured mostly traded to at present. "I haven't begun insuring yet. I'm looking about me." On the Monday morning, Herbert escorted me to Hammersmith, where lay the senior Mr. Pocket's house. Mr. Pocket took me into the house and showed me my room, which was a pleasant one, and so furnished that I could use it with comfort for my own private sitting-room. He then knocked at the doors of two other similar rooms, and introduced me to their occupants, by name Drummle and Startop. Drummle, an old-looking young man of a heavy order of architecture, was whistling. Startop, younger in years and appearance, was reading and holding his head as if he thought himself in danger of exploding it with too strong a charge of knowledge. It occurred to me that if I could retain a bedroom in Barnard's Inn, my life would be agreeably varied, while my manners would be none the worse for Herbert's society. Bentley Drummle did not take up my acquaintance in an agreeable spirit. Heavy in figure, movement, and comprehension, he was idle, proud, niggardly, reserved, and suspicious. He came of rich people down in Somersetshire, who had nursed this combination of qualities until they made the discovery that it was just of age and a blockhead. Thus Bentley Drummle had come to Mr. Pocket when he was a head taller than that gentleman, and half a dozen heads thicker than most gentlemen. Startop had been spoilt by a weak mother, and kept at home when he ought to have been at school. But he was devotedly attached to her, and admired her beyond measure, and had himself a woman's delicacy of feature. It was but natural that I should take to him much more kindly than to Drummle. When I had been in Mr. Pocket's family a month or two, Mr. and Mrs. Camilla turned up. Camilla was Mr. Pocket's sister. Georgiana, whom I had seen at Miss Havisham's on the same occasion, also turned up. She was a cousin. These people hated me with the hatred of cupidity and disappointment, and, as a matter of course, fawned upon me in my prosperity with the basest meanness. These were the surroundings among which I settled down and applied myself to my education. I soon contracted expensive habits, and began to spend an amount of money that a few short months before I should have thought almost fabulous. But through good and evil I stuck to my books, and between Mr. Pocket and Herbert I got on fast. It was at about this time that Wemmick invited me to dine at his house, which lay in the district of Walworth. This appeared to be a collection of back lanes, ditches, and little gardens, and to present the aspect of a rather dull retirement. Wemmick's house was a little wooden cottage in the midst of plots of garden, and the top of it was cut out and painted like a battery, mounted with guns. "My own doing. Looks pretty, don't it?" I highly commended it. I think it was the smallest house I ever saw, with the queerest Gothic windows, and a Gothic door almost too small to get in at. "That's a real flagstaff, you see, and on Sundays I run up a real flag. Then look here, after I've crossed this bridge, I hoist it up, so, and cut off the communication." The bridge was a plank, and it crossed a chasm about 4 feet wide and 2 deep, but it was very pleasant to see the pride with which he hoisted it up and made it fast. "At 9 o'clock every night, Greenwich time, the gun fires. There he is, you see, and when you hear him go, I think you'll say he's a stinger." The piece of ordnance referred to was mounted in a separate fortress constructed of lattice work. Then at the back, out of sight, so as not to impede the idea of fortifications, there's a pig, and there are fowls and rabbits. Then I knock together my own little frame, you see, and grow cucumbers. And you'll judge at supper what sort of a salad I can raise. You wouldn't mind being at once introduced to the aged parent, would you? It wouldn't put you out." I expressed the readiness I felt, and we went into the castle. There we found, sitting by a fire, a very old man in a flannel coat, clean, cheerful, comfortable, and well cared for, but intensely deaf. "Well, aged parent, how am you?"
"All right, John, all right."
"Here's Mr. Pip, aged parent, and I wish you could hear his name. Nod away at him, Mr. Pip, that's what he likes. Nod away at him, if you please, like winking."
"This is a fine place for my son, sir. This spot and these beautiful works upon it ought to be kept together by the nation, after my son's time for the people's enjoyment."
"You're as proud of it as Punch, ain't you, aged? There's a nod for you," giving him a tremendous one. "There's another for you," giving him a still more tremendous one. "You like that, don't you? If you're not tired, Mr. Pip, though I know it's tiring to strangers, will you tip him one more? You can't think how it pleases him." I tipped him several more, and he was in great spirits. "Getting near gunfire," said Wemmick then. "It's the aged's treat." The aged began heating the poker with expectant eyes as a preliminary to the performance of this great nightly ceremony. Wemmick stood with his watch in his hand until the moment was come for him to take the red-hot poker from the aged and repair to the battery. He took it and went out, and presently the stinger went off with a bang that shook the crazy little box of a cottage as if it must fall to pieces, and made every glass and teacup in it ring. Upon this, the aged, who I believe would have been blown out of his armchair but for holding on by the elbows, cried out exultingly,
"He's fired! I heard him!"
And I nodded at the old gentleman until it is no figure of speech to declare that I absolutely could not see him. The supper was excellent, and though the castle was rather subject to dry rot, insomuch that it tasted like a bad nut, and though the pig might have been further off, I was heartily pleased with my whole entertainment.
My dear Mr. Pip, I write this by request of Mr. Gargery, for to let you know that he's going to London in company with Mr. Wopsle, and will be glad, if agreeable, to be allowed to see you. He would call at Barnard's Hotel Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock, when, if not agreeable, please leave word. Your poor sister is much the same as when you left. We talk of you in the kitchen every night, and wonder what you're saying and doing. If not considered in the light of a liberty, excuse it for the love of poor old days. No more, dear Mr. Pip, from your ever obliged and affectionate servant, Biddy. P.S. He wishes me most particular to write what larks. He says you will understand. I hope and do not doubt it will be agreeable to see him, even though a gentleman. For you had ever a good heart, and he is a worthy, worthy man. I've read him all excepting only the last little sentence, and he wishes me most particular to write again. What larks.
I received this letter by post on Monday morning, and therefore its appointment was for the next day. Let me confess exactly with what feelings I looked forward to Joe's coming. Not with pleasure, though I was bound to him by so many ties. No, with considerable disturbance, some mortification, and a keen sense of incongruity. If I could have kept him away by paying money, I certainly would have paid money. My greatest reassurance was that he was coming to Barnard's Inn, not to Hammersmith, and consequently would not fall in Bentley Drummle's way. I had little objection to his being seen by Herbert or his father, for both of whom I had a respect, but I had the sharpest sensitiveness as to his being seen by Drummle, whom I held in contempt. So, throughout life, our worst weaknesses and meannesses are usually committed for the sake of the people whom we most despise. When Joe arrived, I thought he never would have done wiping his feet, but at last he came in. "Joe? How are you, Joe?" "Pip! How are you, Pip?" With his good, honest face all glowing and shining, and his hat put down on the floor between us, he caught both my hands and worked them straight up and down, as if I had been the last patented pump. "I'm glad to see you, Joe. Give me a hat." But Joe, taking it up carefully with both hands, like a bird's nest with eggs in it, wouldn't hear of parting with that piece of property, and persisted in standing talking over it in a most uncomfortable way. "Which you have that growed, and that swelled, and that gentle folked, as to be sure you are a honour to your king and country." "And you, Joe, look wonderfully well." "Thank God, I'm equal to most. And your sister, she's no worse than she were. And Biddy, she's ever right and ready, and all friends is no backarder, if not no forwarder. Except in Wopsle, he's had a drop." "Had a drop, Joe?" "Why, yes. He's left the church and went into the play-acting." Then Herbert entered the room, so I presented Joe to Herbert, who held out his hand, but Joe backed from it and held on to his hat. "Your servant, sir, which I hope is you and Pip. I mean to say, you two gentlemen, which I hope is you get your healths in this close spot." When Herbert had left us for the city, Joe began, "Us two being now alone, sir—" "Joe, how can you call me sir?" Joe looked at me for a single instant with something faintly like reproach. Utterly preposterous as his cravat was, and as his collars were, I was conscious of a sort of dignity in the look. "Us two being now alone, and me having the intentions and abilities to stay not many minutes more, I will now conclude, leastways begin, to mention what have led to my having had the present honour. I were at the Bargeman t'other night, Pip, when there come up in his shay-cart, Pumblechook, and his word were, 'Joseph, Miss Havisham, she wished to speak to you.'" "Miss Havisham, Joe? Go on, please." "Next day, sir, having cleaned myself, I go and I see Miss A." "Miss A, Joe?" "Miss A, or otherways Havisham. Her expression air then as following: 'Mr. Gargery, you air in correspondence with Mr. Pip. Having had a letter from you, I were able to say, I am. Would you tell him then,' says she, 'that which Estella has come home and would be glad to see him?'" I felt my face fire up as I looked at Joe. "Biddy, when I got home and asked her for to write the message to you, Biddy says, 'I know he will be very glad to have it by word of mouth. It is holiday time. You want to see him? Go.' I have now concluded, sir, and Pip, I wish you ever well and ever prospering to a greater and greater height." "But you are not going now, Joe?" "Yes, I am," said Joe. "But you are coming back to dinner, Joe?" "No, I am not," said Joe. Our eyes met, and all the "sir" melted out of that manly heart as he gave me his hand. "Pip, dear old chap, life is made of ever so many partings welded together, as I may say, and one man's a blacksmith and one's a goldsmith. Divisions among such must come, and must be met as they come. You and me is not two figures to be together in London, nor yet anywheres else but what is private, and be known and understood among friends. It ain't that I'm proud, but that I want to be right, as you shall never see me no more in these clothes. I'm wrong in these clothes. I'm wrong out of the forge, the kitchen, or off the meshes.
You won't find half so much fault in me if you think of me in my forge dress, with my hammer in my hand, or even my pipe. You won't find half so much fault in me if, supposing as you should ever wish to see me, you come and put your head into the forge window and see Joe the blacksmith there at the old anvil, in the old burnt apron, sticking to the old work. I'm awful dull, but I hope I've beat out something nigh the rights of this at last. And so God bless you, dear old Pip, old chap. God bless you.
I had not been mistaken in my fancy that there was a simple dignity in him. The fashion of his dress could no more come in its way when he spoke these words than it could come in its way in heaven. He touched me gently on the forehead and went out. As soon as I could recover myself sufficiently, I hurried out after him and looked for him in the neighbouring streets. But he was gone. It was clear that I must repair to our town next day. I arrived at the gate of Satis house at my old time and rang the bell with an unsteady hand. When the gate swung on its rusty hinges, I started to find myself confronted by a man dressed in sober grey. The last man I should have expected to see in that place of porter at Miss Havisham's door. Orlick!
Ah, young master, there's more changes than yours.
How did you come here?
I come here on my legs.
Are you here for good?
I ain't here for harm, young master, I suppose.
Then you have left the forge?
Do this look like a forge? Now do it look like it?
I asked him how long he had left Gargery's forge.
One day is so like another here that I don't know without casting it up. However, I come here some time since you left.
I could have told you that, Orlick.
Ah, but then you've got to be a scholar.
By this time we had come to the house. Well, shall I go up to Miss Havisham?
Burn me if I know.
I am expected, I believe.
Burn me twice over if I can say.
Upon that I turned down the long passage which I had first trodden in my thick boots. I tapped in my old way at the door of Miss Havisham's room.
Pip's rap,
I heard her say.
Come in, Pip.
She was in her chair near the old table, in the old dress, with her two hands crossed on her stick, her chin resting on them, and her eyes on the fire. Sitting near her was an elegant lady whom I had never seen.
Come in, Pip. Come in, Pip. How do you do, Pip? So, you kiss my hand as if I were a queen, eh? Well?
I heard, Miss Havisham, that you were so kind as to wish me to come and see you, and I came directly.
Well?
The lady, whom I had never seen before, lifted up her eyes and looked archly at me, and then I saw that the eyes were Estella's eyes. But she was so much changed, was so much more beautiful and so much more womanly. I fancied as I looked at her that I slipped hopelessly back into the coarse and common boy again. Oh, the sense of distance and disparity that came upon me, and the inaccessibility that came about her.
Do you find her much changed, Pip? She was proud and insulting, and you wanted to go away from her. Don't you remember?
I said confusedly that that was long ago, and that I knew no better then, and the like. Estella smiled with perfect composure.
Is he changed? Very much. Less coarse and common?
Estella laughed and looked at me. She treated me as a boy still, but she lured me on. We sat in the dreamy room among the old strange influences which had so wrought upon me, and I learnt that she had but just come home from France, and that she was going to London. When we had conversed for a while, Miss Havisham said in a whisper to me,
Is she beautiful, graceful, well-grown? Do you admire her?
Everybody must who sees her, Miss Havisham. She drew an arm round my neck and drew my head close down to hers as she sat in the chair.
Love her, love her, love her. If she favours you, love her. If she wounds you, love her. If she tears your heart to pieces,
and as it gets older and stronger, it will tear deeper. Love her, love her, love her.
I could feel the muscles of the thin arm round my neck well with the vehemence that possessed her.
Hear me, Pip. I adopted her to be loved. I bred her and educated her to be loved. I developed her into what she is, that she might be loved. Love her.
She said the word often enough, and there could be no doubt that she meant to say it. But if the often repeated word had been hate instead of love, despair, revenge, dire death, it could not have sounded from her lips more like a curse. It was arranged that when Estella came to London, I should be forewarned of her coming, and should meet her at the coach. And then I took leave of her, and touched her, and left her. The following evening, when dinner was done and we were sitting with our feet upon the fender, I said to Herbert, "My dear Herbert, I have something very particular to tell you. It concerns myself and one other person." Herbert looked at me because I didn't go on. "Herbert, I adore Estella." Instead of being transfixed, Herbert replied in an easy, matter-of-course way, "Exactly. Well?" "Well, Herbert? Is that all you say? Well? What next, I mean? Of course I know that." "How do you know it?" "How do I know it, Handel? Why, from you." "I never told you." "Told me? You have never told me when you have got your hair cut, but I have had senses to perceive it. You have always adored her ever since I have known you." "Very well, then. I have never left off adoring her. And she has come back a most beautiful and most elegant creature, and I saw her yesterday. And if I adored her before, I now doubly adore her." "Have you any idea yet of Estella's views on the adoration question?" I shook my head gloomily. "Oh, she is thousands of miles away from me. Patience, my dear Handel. Time enough, time enough." Herbert paused here, and then went on. "I was going to say a word or two, Handel, concerning my father's oldest son. May I ask you if you have ever had an opportunity of remarking down in your part of the country that the children of not exactly suitable marriages are always more particularly anxious to be married?" This was such a singular question that I asked him in return, "Is it so?" "I don't know. That's what I want to know." "Then you are?" I ventured. "I am. But it's a secret." I assured him of my keeping the secret, and begged to be favoured with further particulars. "May I ask the name?" "Name of Clara." "Live in London?" "Yes. Perhaps I ought to mention that she is rather below my mother's nonsensical family notions. Her father had to do with the victualling of passenger ships. I think he was a species of purser." "What is he now?" "He's an invalid now." "Living on the first floor?" Which was not at all what I meant, for I had intended my question to apply to his means. When he had laughed heartily, he became meek again, and told me that the moment he began to realize capital, it was his intention to marry this young lady. He added, as a self-evident proposition engendering low spirits, "But you can't marry, you know, while you're looking about you." One day, when I was busy with my books, I received a note by the post. It had no set beginning, as Dear Mr. Pip, or Dear Pip, or anything, but ran thus.
"I am to come to London the day after tomorrow by the midday coach. I believe it was settled you should meet me. At all events, Miss Havisham has that impression, and I write in obedience to it. She sends you her regard. Yours, Estella."
The coach came promptly, and I saw her face at the coach window and her hand waving to me. In her furred travelling dress, Estella seemed more delicately beautiful than she had ever seemed yet, even in my eyes. Her manner was more winning than she had cared to let it be to me before, and I thought I saw Miss Havisham's influence in the change.
"I am going to Richmond. I am going to live at a great expense with a lady there, an old friend of Miss Havisham, who has the power, or says she has, of taking me about and introducing me, and showing people to me and showing me to people."
"I suppose you will be glad of variety and admiration?"
"Yes, I suppose so.
I wonder Miss Havisham could part with you again so soon.
It is a part of Miss Havisham's plans for me, Pip.
It was the first time she had ever called me by my name. Of course she did so purposely, and knew that I should treasure it up. We came to Richmond all too soon, and our destination there was a house by the green, a staid old house where 2 maids came fluttering out to receive Estella. The doorway soon absorbed her boxes, and she gave me her hand and a smile and said good night, and was absorbed likewise. And still I stood looking at the house, thinking how happy I should be if I lived there with her, and knowing that I never was happy with her, but always miserable. As I am now generalizing a period of my life with the object of clearing my way before me, I can scarcely do so better than by at once completing the description of our usual manners and customs at Barnard's Inn, by saying simply that we spent as much money as we could, and got as little for it as people could make up their minds to give us. We had fallen into our customary serene state one evening, when we heard a letter dropped through the slit in the door, and fall on the ground. "It's for you, Handel. I hope there's nothing the matter." This was an allusion to its heavy black seal and border. The letter was signed Trabb and Co., and its contents were simply that I was an honoured sir, and that they begged to inform me that Mrs. J. Gargery had departed this life on Monday last, at 20 minutes past 6 in the evening, and that my attendance was requested at the interment on Monday next, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. After the funeral, Biddy, Joe, and I had a cold dinner together, but we dined in the best parlour, not in the old kitchen, and Joe was so exceedingly particular what he did with his knife and fork and the salt-cellar and what not, that there was great restraint upon us. When the shadows of evening were closing in, I took an opportunity of getting into the garden with Biddy for a little talk. "Biddy, I think you might have written to me about these sad matters."
Do you, Mr. Pip? I should have written if I had thought that.
"I suppose it will be difficult for you to remain here now, Biddy dear."
Oh, I can't do so, Mr. Pip. I've been speaking to Mrs. Hubble, and I'm going to her tomorrow. I hope we shall be able to take some care of Mr. Gargery, together, until he settles down.
I walked a little further with Biddy, looking silently at her downcast eyes. "I have not heard the particulars of my sister's death, Biddy."
They're very slight, poor thing. She'd been in one of her bad states when she came out of it in the evening and said quite plainly, 'Joe.' As she'd never said any word, I ran and fetched in Mr. Gargery from the forge. She made signs to me that she wanted him to sit down close to her, and wanted me to put her arms round his neck. So I did. And so presently she said, 'Joe,' again, and once, 'Pardon,' and once, 'Pip.' And so she'd never lifted her head up any more."
Biddy cried. The darkening garden and the lane and the stars that were coming out were blurred in my own sight. By degrees Biddy told me how Joe loved me, and how Joe never complained of anything. She didn't say of me. She had no need. I knew what she meant. "Of course I shall be often down here now, Biddy. I am not going to leave poor Joe alone."
"Are you quite sure, then, that you will come to see him often?"
asked Biddy, stopping in the narrow garden walk, and looking at me under the stars with a clear and honest eye. Early in the morning I was to go. Early in the morning I was out, and looking in unseen at one of the wooden windows of the forge. There I stood for minutes looking at Joe, already at work with a glow of health and strength upon his face that made it show as if the bright sun of the life in store for him were shining on it. "Good-bye, dear Joe. No, don't wipe it off. For God's sake, give me your blackened hand. I shall be down soon and often."
"Never too soon, sir, and never too often, Pip."
Once more the mists were rising as I walked away. If they disclosed to me, as I suspect they did, that I should not come back, and that Biddy was quite right, all I can say is they were quite right too. Time went on, and I came of age, in fulfilment of Herbert's prediction that I should do so before I knew where I was. Herbert himself had come of age 8 months before me, As he had nothing else than his majority to come into, the event did not make a profound sensation in Barnard's Inn. But we had looked forward to my 21st birthday. I received an official note from Wemmick informing me that Mr. Jaggers would be glad if I would call upon him at 5 in the afternoon of the auspicious day.
Well, Pip, I must call you Mr. Pip today. Congratulations, Mr. Pip.
We shook hands. He was always a remarkably short shaker, and I thanked him.
Now, Mr. Pip, attend if you please. You have been drawing pretty freely here. Your name occurs pretty often in Wemmick's cash book. But you are in debt, of course?
I am afraid I must say yes, sir.
You know you must say yes, don't you?
Yes, sir.
I don't ask you what you owe because you don't know, and if you did know you wouldn't tell me. You would say less. Yes, my friend. It's likely enough that you think you wouldn't, but you would. You'll excuse me, but I know better than you. Now, take this piece of paper in your hand. Have you got it? Very good. Now, unfold it and tell me what it is.
This is a banknote for £500.
You consider it undoubtedly a handsome sum of money. Now, that handsome sum of money, Pip, is your own. It is a present to you on this day, in earnest of your expectations. And at the rate of that handsome sum of money per annum, and at no higher rate, you are to live until the donor of the whole appears. That is to say, you will now take your money affairs entirely into your own hands, and you will draw from Wemmick £125 per quarter until you are in communication with the fountain-head and no longer with the mere agent. That is all I have to say.
If that is all you have to say, sir, I remarked, there can be nothing left for me to say. I devoted the next ensuing Sunday afternoon to a pilgrimage to the castle. I informed Wemmick that I was anxious in behalf of Herbert Pocket, and sought advice from Wemmick's experience and knowledge of men and affairs, how I could best try with my resources to help Herbert to some present income, say of 100 a year, to keep him in good home and heart, and gradually to buy him on to some small partnership. I begged Wemmick, in conclusion, to understand that my help must always be rendered without Herbert's knowledge or suspicion, and that there was no one else in the world with whom I could advise. Wemmick was silent for a little while, and then said, with a kind of start, "Mr. Pip, I'll put on my considering cap, and I think all you want to do may be done by degrees. There's an accountant and agent I know. I'll look him up and go to work for you." The upshot was that we found a worthy young merchant or shipping broker, not long established in business, who wanted intelligent help and who wanted capital, and who, in due course of time and receipt, would want a partner. The whole business was so cleverly managed that Herbert had not the least suspicion of my hand being in it. I never shall forget the radiant face with which he came home one afternoon and told me as a mighty piece of news of his having fallen in with one Clarica, the young merchant's name, and of Clarica having shown an extraordinary inclination towards him, and of his belief that the opening had come at last. When he had talked to me for a whole evening in a flush of pleasure and success, I did really cry in good earnest when I went to bed, to think that my expectations had done some good to somebody. It is impossible to turn this leaf of my life without putting Bentley Drummle's name upon it, or I would very gladly. It happened that Herbert and I found ourselves one evening dining with Drummle and Startop. Drummle rose to propose a toast. What was my indignant surprise when he called upon the company to pledge him to Estella. Estella who? Never you mind. Estella of where? Of Richmond, gentlemen, and a peerless beauty. Much he knew about peerless beauties, a mean, miserable idiot, I whispered to Herbert. I know that lady, said Herbert across the table when the toast had been honoured. Do you? Said Drummle. And so do I added with a scarlet face. Do you? Said Drummle. Oh, Lord. I tell this lightly, but it was no light thing to me, for I cannot adequately express what pain it gave me to think that Estella should show any favour to a contemptible, clumsy, sulky booby, so very far below the average. I was 23 years of age. Not another word had I heard to enlighten me on the subject of my expectations, and my 23rd birthday was a week gone. We had left Barnard's Inn more than a year, and lived in the Temple. Our chambers were in Garden Court down by the river. Mr. Pocket Senior and I had for some time parted company as to our original relations, though we continued on the best terms. Notwithstanding my inability to settle anything, which I hope arose out of the restless and incomplete tenure on which I held my means, I had a taste for reading, and read regularly so many hours a day. Business had taken Herbert on a journey to Marseille. I was alone, and had a dull sense of being alone. It was wretched weather, stormy and wet. I read with my watch upon the table, purposing to close my book at 11 o'clock. As I shut it, St. Paul's and all the many church clocks in the city, some leading, some accompanying, some following, struck that hour. The sound was curiously flawed by the wind, and I was listening and thinking how the wind assailed and tore it, when I heard a footstep on the stair. I took up my reading lamp and went out onto the stairhead. Whoever was below had stopped on seeing my lamp, for all was quiet. "There is someone down there, is there not?"
Yes.
"What floor do you want?"
The top. Mr. Pip.
"That is my name." And the man came on. I saw a face that was strange to me, looking up with an incomprehensible air of being touched and pleased by the sight of me. I made out that he was substantially dressed, but roughly, like a voyager by sea. His age was about 60. I saw, with a stupid kind of amazement, that he was holding out both his hands to me. "Pray, what is your business?"
My business? Ah, yes. I will explain my business by your leave.
"Do you wish to come in?"
Yes, I wish to come in, master.
I took him into the room I had just left, and having set the lamp on the table, asked him as civilly as I could to explain himself. Once more he was holding out both his hands to me. And suddenly I knew him. If the wind and the rain had driven away the intervening years, had scattered all the intervening objects, had swept us to the churchyard where we first stood face to face on such different levels, I could not have known my convict more distinctly than I knew him now, as he stood before me. I reluctantly gave him my hands. He grasped them heartily, raised them to his lips, kissed them, and still held them.
You acted noble, my boy. Noble, Pip, and I have never forgot it.
At a change in his manner, as if he were even going to embrace me, I laid a hand upon his breast and put him away. "Stay. Keep off. If you are grateful to me for what I did when I was a little child, I hope you have shown your gratitude by mending your way of life. If you have come here to thank me, it was not necessary. Still, however you have found me out, you are wet and you look weary. Will you drink something before you go?" I made him some hot rum and water. When at last I put the glass to him, I saw with amazement that his eyes were full of tears. "I hope that you will not think I spoke harshly to you just now. I had no intention of doing it, and I am sorry for it if I did. I wish you well and happy." He stretched out his hand. I gave him mine, and then he drank and drew his sleeve across his eyes and forehead. "How are you living?"
I've been a sheep farmer, stock breeder, other trades besides, away in the New World, many 1,000 mile of stormy water off from this.
"I hope you have done well."
I've done wonderful well.
"I'm glad to hear it."
I hope to hear you say so, my dear boy. May I make so bold as to ask you how you have done well, since you and me was out on them lone shivering marshes?
I forced myself to tell him that I had been chosen to succeed to some property.
Might a mere warmint ask what property?
I faltered. "I don't know."
Might a mere warmint ask whose property?
I faltered again. "I don't know."
Could I make a guess, I wonder, at your income since you come of age? As to the first figure now, 5?
My heart beat like a heavy hammer.
Concerning a guardian, there ought to have been some guardian or such like while you was a minor. Some lawyer, maybe, whose name might be Jaggers.
I could not have spoken one word, though it had been to save my life.
Yes, Pip, dear boy. I've made a gentleman on you. It's me what has done it. I swore that time sure as ever I earned a guinea, that guinea should go to you. I swore afterwards sure as ever I speculated and got rich, you should get rich. I lived rough that you should live smooth. I worked hard that you should be above work. What odds, dear boy? Do I tell it for you to feel an obligation? Not a bit. I tell it for you to know, as that there hunted dunghill dog what you kept life in got his head so high he could make a gentleman. And, Pip, you're him.
Again he took both my hands and put them to his lips, while my blood ran cold within me.
Don't you mind talking, Pip. You can't do better nor keep quiet, dear boy. You ain't looked slowly forward to this as I have. You wasn't prepared for this as I was. But didn't you never think it might be me?
Oh, no. Never.
Well, you see, it was me. And single-handed. Never a soul in it but my own self and Mr. Jaggers.
I tried to collect my thoughts, but I was stunned. Presently he asked,
"Where will you put me? I must be put somewheres, dear boy."
"To sleep?"
"Yes, and to sleep long and sound, for I've been sea-tossed and sea-washed months and months."
"My friend and companion is absent. You must have his room."
"He won't come back tomorrow, will he?"
"No, not tomorrow."
"Because look-ye here, dear boy, caution is necessary."
"How do you mean, caution?"
"I was sent for life. It's death to come back. I should of a certainty be hanged, if took."
Nothing was needed but this. The wretched man, after loading wretched me with his gold and silver chains for years, had risked his life to come to me, and I held it there in my keeping. For an hour or more after he retired, I remained too stunned to think. And it was not until I began to think that I began fully to know how wrecked I was, and how the ship in which I sailed was gone to pieces. Miss Havisham's intentions towards me all a mere dream. Estella not designed for me. I only suffered in Satis House as a convenience, a sting for the greedy relations, a model with a mechanical heart to practice on. Those were the first smarts I had. But sharpest and deepest pain of all, it was for the convict, guilty of I knew not what crimes, that I had deserted Joe. The impossibility of keeping my dreaded visitor concealed in the chambers was self-evident. It could not be done, and the attempt to do it would inevitably engender suspicion. It was then I heard a second noise outside my chambers. Groping my way down the dark staircase, I fell over something, and that something was a man crouching in a corner. The man made no answer when I asked him what he did there, but eluded my touch in silence, and disappeared into the darkness. It troubled me that there should have been a lurker on the stairs, on that night of all nights in the year, and I fell to wondering the identity of the silent intruder. In the morning the convict and I talked further. "I do not even know," said I, "by what name to call you. I shall give out that you are my uncle."
"That's it, dear boy. Call me uncle."
"You assumed some name, I suppose, on board ship?"
"Yes, my dear boy. I took the name of Provis."
"Do you mean to keep that name?"
"Why, yes, dear boy. It's as good as another, unless you'd like another."
"What is your real name?"
"Magwitch, christened Abel."
"What were you brought up to be?"
"A warmint, dear boy."
He answered quite seriously, and used the word as if it denoted some profession. "When you came into the temple last night—"
"Yes, dear boy."
"When you came in, had you anyone with you?"
"With me? No, dear boy."
"But there was someone there?"
"I didn't take particular notice, but I think there was a person, too, come in along of me."
"Were you known in London?"
"Not over and above, dear boy. I was in the provinces mostly."
"Were you tried in London?"
"Which time?"
"The last time." He nodded.
"First knowed Mr. Jaggers that way. Jaggers was for me."
"What precautions can be taken against your being recognized and seized?"
"Well, dear boy, the danger ain't so great. Without I was informed again, the danger ain't so much to signify. There's Jaggers and there's Wemmick, and there's you. Who else is there to inform?"
Is there no chance person who might identify you in the street?
Well, there ain't many, nor yet I don't intend to advertise myself. Still, looky here, Pip. If the danger had been 50 times as great, I should have come to see you, mind you, just the same.
And how long do you remain?
How long? I'm not a-going back. I've come for good.
Once more he took me by both hands, and surveyed me with an air of admiring proprietorship. It appeared to me that I could do no better than secure him some quiet lodging hard by, of which he might take possession when Herbert returned, whom I expected in 2 or 3 days. The secret must be confided to Herbert as a matter of unavoidable necessity. There being, to my knowledge, a respectable lodging-house in Essex Street, the back of which looked into the Temple, and was almost within hail of my windows, I repaired to that house, and was so fortunate as to secure the 2nd floor for my uncle, Mr. Provis. I then went from shop to shop, making such purchases as were necessary to the change in his appearance. Next day the clothes I had ordered all came home, and he put them on. Whatever he put on became him less, it dismally seemed to me, than what he had worn before. From head to foot there was convict in the very grain of the man. In vain should I attempt to describe the astonishment and disquiet of Herbert when he and I and Provis sat down before the fire, and I recounted the whole of the secret. When Provis was safely in his new lodgings, and I returned to our chambers, Herbert received me with open arms, and I had never felt before so blessedly what it is to have a friend. When he had spoken some sound words of sympathy and encouragement, we sat down to consider the question, what was to be done? My poor dear Handel, I am too stunned to think. So was I, Herbert, when the blow first fell. Still, something must be done. He is intent upon various new expenses, horses and carriages, and lavish appearance of all kinds. He must be stopped somehow. You mean that you can't accept? Well, how can I? Think of him. Look at him. An involuntary shudder passed over both of us. Yet I am afraid the dreadful truth is, Herbert, that he is attached to me, strongly attached to me. Oh, was there ever such a fate? My poor dear Handel. Then again, I am heavily in debt, very heavily for me, who have now no expectations. And I have been bred to no calling, and I am fit for nothing. Well, don't say fit for nothing. You could work in Clarriker's house. I am working up towards a partnership, you know. Poor fellow, he little suspected with whose money. Herbert continued, but there is another question. This is an ignorant, determined man who has long had one fixed idea. If you cut the ground from under his feet, destroy his idea, imagine what he might do under the disappointment. I have imagined, Herbert, and dreamed of it ever since the fatal night of his arrival. Nothing has been in my thoughts so distinctly as his putting himself in the way of being taken. Then that is his power over you as long as he remains in England, and that would be his reckless course if you forsook him. I was struck by the horror of this idea. What was to be done? The first and the main thing to be done is to get him out of England. You will have to go with him, and then he may be induced to go. When my convict and benefactor was next with us, I prevailed upon him to tell his life story to us, beginning with our first encounter and the second convict who was with him then. After you were gone last night, I told my friend of the struggle that the soldiers found you engaged in on the marshes when we came up. You remember?
Remember? I think so.
We want to know something about that man and about you. It is strange to know no more about either, and particularly you, than I was able to tell last night. Is not this as good a time as another for our knowing more?
Well, so be it.
He spread a hand on each knee, and after turning an angry eye on the fire for a few silent moments, looked round at us, and said what follows.
Dear boy, and Pip's comrade, I am not a-going for to tell you my life, like a song or a storybook, but to give it you short and handy. I'll put it at once into a mouthful of English. In jail and out of jail, in jail and out of jail, in jail and out of jail. There, you've got it. That's my life, pretty much, down to such times as I got shipped off after Pip stood my friend.
So far as I could find, there weren't a soul that see young Abel Magwitch with as little on him as in him but what caught fright at him, and either drove him off or took him up. I was took up, to that extent that I regularly growed up, took up. At Epsom races, at an inn, a matter of over 20 years ago, I got acquainted with a man whose skull I'd crack with this poker like the claw of a lobster, if I'd got it on this hob. His right name was Compeyson, and that's the man, dear boy, what you see me a-pounding in the ditch. He set up for a gentleman, this Compeyson, and he'd been to a public boarding school and had learning. He was a smooth one to talk, and was a dab at the ways of gentlefolks. He was good-looking, too. Compeyson, he looks at me very noticing, and I look at him. To judge from appearances, you're out of luck, says Compeyson to me. Yes, master, and I've never been in it much. Luck changes, says Compeyson. Perhaps yours is going to change. And Compeyson took me on to be his man and partner. And what was Compeyson's business in which we was to go partners? Compeyson's business was the swindling, handwriting, forging, stolen banknote passing, and such like. There was another in with Compeyson, as was called Arthur. He was in a decline, and was a shadow to look at. Him and Compeyson had been in a bad thing with a rich lady some years afore, and they'd made a pot of money by it. But Compeyson betted and gamed, and he'd have run through the king's taxes. So Arthur was a-dying poor, and with the horrors on him, and he soon was dead of it.
Magwitch turned his face to the fire, and spread his hands broader on his knees, and lifted them off and put them on again.
There ain't no need to go into it. The time with Compeyson was almost as hard a time as ever I had. That said, all's said. At last, me and Compeyson was both committed for felony, on a charge of putting stolen notes in circulation, and there was other charges behind. Compeyson says to me, separate defences, no communication, and that was all. And I was so miserable poor that I sold all the clothes I had except what hung on me back, afore I could get jaggers. When we was put in the dock, I noticed first of all what a gentleman Compeyson looked with his curly hair and his black clothes and his white pocket handkerchief, and what a common sort of wretch I looked. And when the verdict come, weren't it Compeyson as was recommended to mercy on account of good character and bad company, and giving up all the information he could against me? And weren't it me as got never a word but guilty? And when we're sentenced, ain't it him as gets 7 year and me 14? And ain't it him as the judge is sorry for because he might have done so well? And ain't it me as the judge perceives to be an old offender of violent passion, likely to come to worse? We was in the same prison ship, but I couldn't get at him for long, though I tried. The black hole of that ship weren't a strong one. I escaped with the shore, and I was a-hiding among the graves there, envying them as was in 'em and all over, when I first see my boy.
He regarded me with a look of affection that made him almost abhorrent to me again, though I had felt great pity for him.
By my boy, I was give to understand as Compeyson was out on them marshes too. Upon my soul, I half believe he escaped in his terror to get quit of me, not knowing it was me as had got ashore. I hunted him down. I smashed his face. And now, says I, as the worst thing I can do, caring nothing for myself, I'll drag you back. And I'd have swum off, towing him by the hair if it had come to that, and I'd have got him aboard without the soldiers. Of course, he'd much the best of it to the last. His character was so good. He had escaped when he was made half wild by me and my murderous intentions, and his punishment was light. I was put in irons, brought to trial again, and sent for life. I didn't stop for life, dear boy and Pip's comrade, being here.
Magwitch slowly took a tangle of tobacco from his pocket, and plucked his pipe from his buttonhole, and slowly filled it, and began to smoke. "Is he dead?" I asked, after a silence.
"Is who dead, dear boy?"
"Compeyson."
He hopes I am, if he's alive, you may be sure. I never heard no more of him.
Herbert had been writing with his pencil in the cover of a book. He softly pushed the book over to me, as Provis stood smoking with his eyes on the fire. And I read in it, "Young Havisham's name was Arthur. Compeyson is the man who professed to be Miss Havisham's lover." I shut the book and nodded slightly to Herbert, and naturally began to wonder, as I could see Herbert did too, whether the silent intruder following my convict was Compeyson himself. But we neither of us said anything, and both looked at Provis as he sat smoking by the fire. Never had I breathed, and never would I breathe, or so I resolved, a word of Estella to Provis. But I said to Herbert that before I could go abroad, I must see both Estella and Miss Havisham. This was when we were left alone, on the night of the day when Provis told us his story. I resolved to go out to Richmond next day, and I went. On my presenting myself at Mrs. Brandley's, Estella's maid was called to tell me that Estella had gone into the country. Where? To Satis House, as usual. Not as usual, I said, for she had never yet gone there without me. When was she coming back? There was an air of reservation in the answer which increased my perplexity. And the answer was that her maid believed she was only coming back at all for a little while. I could make nothing of this, except that it was meant that I should make nothing of it, and I went home again in complete discomfiture. Another night consultation with Herbert after Provis was gone home — I always took him home, and always looked well about me — led us to the conclusion that nothing should be said about going abroad until I came back from Miss Havisham's. In the room where the dressing-table stood, and where the wax candles burnt on the wall, I found Miss Havisham and Estella. Miss Havisham seated on a settee near the fire, and Estella on a cushion at her feet. Estella was knitting, and Miss Havisham was looking on. They both raised their eyes as I went in, and both saw an alteration in me.
"What wind blows you here, Pip?"
"Miss Havisham, I went to Richmond yesterday to speak to Estella, and finding that some wind had blown her here, I followed." Miss Havisham motioning me to sit down, I took the chair by the dressing-table which I had often seen her occupy. With all that ruin at my feet and about me, it seemed a natural place for me that day. "What I had to say to Estella, Miss Havisham, I will say before you presently, in a few moments. It will not surprise you, it will not displease you. I am as unhappy as you can ever have meant me to be. I have found out who my patron is. It is not a fortunate discovery, and it is not likely ever to enrich me in reputation, station, fortune, anything. There are reasons why I must say no more of that. It is not my secret, but another's." As I was silent for a while, looking at Estella and considering how to go on, Miss Havisham repeated,
"It is not your secret, but another's. Well?"
"When you first caused me to be brought here, Miss Havisham, when I belonged to the village over yonder, that I wish I had never left, I suppose I did really come here as any other chance boy might have come, as a kind of servant, to gratify a want or a whim, and to be paid for it."
"Aye, Pip, you did."
"And that Mr. Jaggers—"
"Mr. Jaggers had nothing to do with it, and knew nothing of it. His being my lawyer, and his being the lawyer of your patron, is a coincidence."
Anyone might have seen in her haggard face that there was no suppression or evasion so far. "But when I fell into the mistake I have so long remained in, at least you led me on."
"Yes, I led you on."
"Was that kind?" Miss Havisham struck her stick upon the floor and flashed into wrath so suddenly that Estella glanced up at her in surprise.
"Who am I, for God's sake, that I should be kind?"
It was a weak complaint to have made, and I had not meant to make it. I told her so as she sat brooding after this outburst.
"Well, well, well. What else?"
"In humouring my mistake, Miss Havisham, you punished your self-seeking relations."
"I did. You made your own snares. I never made them."
Waiting until she was quiet again, for this too flashed out of her in a wild and sudden way, I went on, "I have been thrown among one family of your relations, Miss Havisham, and have been constantly among them since I went to London. You deeply wrong both Mr. Matthew Pocket and his son Herbert if you suppose them to be otherwise than generous, upright, open, and incapable of anything designing or mean.
They are your friends, Pip.
They made themselves my friends when they supposed me to have superseded them, and when Miss Sarah Pocket, Miss Georgiana, and Mistress Camilla were not my friends, I think. This contrasting of them with the rest seemed, I was glad to see, to do them good with her. She looked at me keenly for a little while, and then said quietly,
"What do you want for them?"
"Miss Havisham, if you would spare the money to do my friend Herbert a lasting service in his life, but which, from the nature of the case, must be done without his knowledge, I could show you how."
"Why must it be done without his knowledge?"
She settled her hands upon her stick, that she might regard me the more attentively. "Because I began the service myself more than 2 years ago without his knowledge, and I don't want to be betrayed. Why I fail in my ability to finish it, I cannot explain. It is a part of the secret which is another person's and not mine." She gradually withdrew her eyes from me, and turned them on the fire for what appeared to be a long time.
"What else?"
"Estella," said I, turning to her now and trying to command my trembling voice, "you know I love you. You know that I have loved you long and dearly." She raised her eyes to my face on being thus addressed, and she looked at me with an unmoved countenance. I saw that Miss Havisham glanced from me to her, and from her to me. I should have said this sooner, but for my long mistake. It induced me to hope that Miss Havisham meant us for one another. Now I have no hope that I shall ever call you mine, Estella. I am ignorant of what may become of me very soon, how poor I may be, or where I may go. Still, I love you. I have loved you ever since I first saw you in this house." Looking at me, perfectly unmoved, she shook her head. "Is it not true that Bentley Drummle is pursuing you?"
"It is quite true."
"That you encourage him, and ride out with him, and that he dines with you this very day?" She seemed a little surprised that I should know it, but again replied,
"Quite true."
"You cannot love him. You would never marry him, Estella." She looked towards Miss Havisham, and considered for a moment. Then she said,
"Why not tell you the truth? I am going to be married to him."
I dropped my face into my hands.
"Don't be afraid of my being a blessing to him. I shall not be that. Come, here is my hand. Do we part on this, you visionary boy or man?"
"Oh, Estella," I answered as my bitter tears fell fast on her hand. "Oh, God bless you. God forgive you." I held her hand to my lips some lingering moments, and so I left her. But ever afterwards I remembered, and soon afterwards with stronger reason, that while Estella looked at me merely with incredulous wonder, the spectral figure of Miss Havisham, her hand held against her heart, seemed all resolved into a ghastly stare of pity and remorse. All done, all gone. So much was done and gone that when I went out at the gate, the light of the day seemed of a darker colour than when I went in. Within a fortnight of my return to London, I received a note from Miss Havisham via Mr. Jaggers, asking me to call on her again in regard to the matter of business I had mentioned on my last visit. I went down again by coach next day. Miss Havisham was not in her own room, but was in the larger room across the landing. Looking in at the door, after knocking in vain, I saw her sitting on the hearth in a ragged chair, close before and lost in the contemplation of the ashy fire. "It is I, Pip. Mr. Jaggers gave me your note yesterday, and I have lost no time."
"Thank you. Thank you."
As I brought another of the ragged chairs to the hearth and sat down, I remarked a new expression on her face, as if she were afraid of me.
"I want to pursue that subject you mentioned to me when you were last here, and to show you that I am not all stone. You said, speaking for your friend, that you could tell me how to do something useful and good. Something that you would like done, is it not?"
"Something that I would like done very much.
What is it?
I began explaining to her that secret history of the partnership. She set her hand upon her stick in the resolute way that sometimes was habitual to her, and looked at the fire with a strong expression of forcing herself to attend. I went on with my explanation, and told her how I had hoped to complete the transaction out of my means, but how in this I was disappointed. That part of the subject, I reminded her, involved matters which could form no part of my explanation, for they were the weighty secrets of another.
So, and how much money is wanting to complete the purchase?
I was rather afraid of stating it, for it sounded a large sum. £900.
If I give you the money for this purpose, will you keep my secret as you have kept your own?
Quite as faithfully.
Can I only serve you, Pip, by serving your friend? Regarding that as done, is there nothing I can do for you yourself?
Nothing. I thank you for the question. I thank you even more for the tone of the question. But there is nothing. She presently rose from her seat and looked about the blighted room for the means of writing. There were none there, and she took from her pocket a yellow set of ivory tablets mounted in tarnished gold, and wrote upon them with a pencil in a case of tarnished gold that hung from her neck.
You are still on friendly terms with Mr. Jaggers?
Quite. I dined with him yesterday.
This is an authority to him to pay you that money, to lay out at your discretion for your friend. I keep no money here, but if you would rather Mr. Jaggers knew nothing of the matter, I will send it to you.
Thank you, Miss Havisham. I have not the least objection to receiving it from him. She read me what she had written, and it was direct and clear, and evidently intended to absolve me from any suspicion of profiting by the receipt of the money. I took the tablets from her hand, and it trembled more as she took off the chain to which the pencil was attached and put it in mine. All this she did without looking at me.
My name is on the first leaf. If you can ever write under my name, I forgive her, though ever so long after my broken heart is dust. Pray do it.
Oh, Miss Havisham, I can do it now. There have been sore mistakes, and my life has been a blind and thankless one, and I want forgiveness and direction far too much to be bitter with you. She turned her face to me, and to my amazement, I may even add to my terror, dropped on her knees at my feet, with her folded hands raised to me.
Oh, what have I done? What have I done?
If you mean, Miss Havisham, what have you done to injure me, let me answer very little. I should have loved her under any circumstances. Is she married?
Yes.
It was a needless question, for a new desolation in the desolate house had told me so.
What have I done? What have I done?
She wrung her hands and crushed her white hair, and returned to this cry over and over again.
What have I done?
I knew not how to answer or how to comfort her. She had done a grievous thing in taking an impressionable child to mould into the form that her wild resentment, spurned affection, and wounded pride found vengeance in.
Until you spoke to her the other day, and until I saw in you a looking-glass that showed me what I once felt myself, I did not know what I had done. What have I done? What have I done?
And so again, 20, 50 times over, what had she done? When her cry had died away, I asked her, Miss Havisham, does what has passed between us give me any excuse for asking you a question relative to Estella? Not as she is, but as she was when she first came here. I had meant to ask Miss Havisham this for some time. I had wanted to ask it and had not dared to for many years. She was seated on the ground, with her arms on the ragged chair and her head leaning on them. She looked full at me when I said this, and replied,
Go on.
Whose child was Estella? She shook her head. You don't know? She shook her head again. "But Mr. Jaggers brought her here?" She nodded her head. "Might I ask her age, then?"
2 or 3. She herself knows nothing but that she was left an orphan, and I adopted her."
She lapsed again into silence. What more could I hope to do by prolonging the interview? I had succeeded on behalf of Herbert. Miss Havisham had told me all she knew of Estella, and I had said and done what I could to ease her mind. No matter with what other words we parted, we parted. Twilight was closing in when I went downstairs into the natural air. Passing on into the front courtyard, I hesitated whether to turn and look, finally, at Satis. I reached the gate, and turned at last. As I looked up at the room where I had left her, I saw a great flaming light spring up. I ran back into the house and up the darkened staircase, terror hastening my steps to Miss Havisham's door. In the same moment I saw her running at me, shrieking, with a whirl of fire blazing all about her, and soaring at least as many feet above her head as she was high. I had a double-caped greatcoat on, and over my arm another thick coat. That I got them off, closed with her, threw her down, and got them over her. That I dragged the great cloth from the table for the same purpose, and with it dragged down the heap of rottenness in the midst, and all the ugly things that sheltered there, that we were on the ground, struggling like desperate enemies, and that the closer I covered her, the more wildly she shrieked and tried to free herself. That this occurred, I knew through the result, but not through anything I felt or thought or knew I did. Assistants were sent for, and I held her until it came. When I got up on the surgeon's coming to her with another aid, I was astonished to see that both my hands were burnt, for I had no knowledge of it through the sense of feeling. On examination it was pronounced that she had received serious hurts, but that they of themselves were far from hopeless. The danger lay mainly in the nervous shock. By the surgeon's directions her bed was carried into that room and laid upon the great table, which happened to be well suited to the dressing of her injuries. When I saw her again an hour afterwards, she lay indeed where I had seen her strike her stick, and had heard her say that she would lie one day. I found, on questioning the servants, that Estella was in Paris, and I got a promise from the surgeon that he would write to her by the next post. Miss Havisham's family I took upon myself, intending to communicate with Mr. Matthew Pocket only, and leave him to do as he liked about informing the rest. This I did next day through Herbert, as soon as I returned to town. When Herbert had been down to Hammersmith and seen his father, he came back to me at our chambers, and devoted the day to attending on me. He was the kindest of nurses, and at stated times took off the bandages and steeped them in the cooling liquid that was kept ready, and put them on again with a patient tenderness that I was deeply grateful for. Early next morning we went out together, and at the corner of Giltspur Street by Smithfield I left Herbert to go his way into the city, and took my way to Little Britain. My appearance, with my arm bandaged and my coat loose over my shoulders, favoured my object. Although I had sent Mr. Jaggers a brief account of the accident as soon as I had arrived in town, yet I had to give him all the details now, and the speciality of the occasion caused our talk to be less dry and hard, and less strictly regulated by the rules of evidence than it had been before. My narrative finished, I then produced Miss Havisham's authority to receive the £900 for Herbert. Mr. Jaggers' eyes retired a little deeper into his head when I handed him the tablets, but he presently handed them over to Wemmick, with instructions to draw the cheque for his signature.
"I am sorry, Pip," said he as I put the cheque in my pocket when he had signed it, "that we do nothing for you."
Miss Havisham was good enough to ask me whether she could do nothing for me, and I told her no.
I should not have told her no if I had been you, but every man ought to know his own business best.
As I thought the time was now come for pursuing the theme I had at heart, I said, turning on Mr. Jaggers, "I did ask something of Miss Havisham, however, sir. I asked her to give me some information relative to her adopted daughter, and she gave me all she possessed."
"Did she? I don't think I should have done so if I had been Miss Havisham, but she ought to know her own business best."
Then I told him what I knew from Miss Havisham. I said that I was desirous to know more. I reminded him of the false hopes into which I had lapsed, the length of time they had lasted, and the discovery I had made, and I hinted at the danger that weighed upon my spirits. I represented myself as being surely worthy of some little confidence from him in return. I told him, little as he cared for such poor dreams, that I had loved Estella dearly and long, and that although I had lost her and must live a bereaved life, whatever concerned her was still nearer and dearer to me than anything else in the world. Mr. Jaggers nodded his head 2 or 3 times, and actually drew a sigh.
"Pip," said he, "we won't talk about poor dreams. You know more about such things than I, having much fresher experience of that kind. But now, I'll put a case to you. Mind, I admit nothing."
He waited for me to declare that I quite understood that he expressly said that he admitted nothing.
"Now, Pip, put this case. Put the case that a woman held a child concealed and was obliged to communicate the fact to her legal adviser. Put the case that at the same time the legal adviser held a trust to find a child for an eccentric rich lady to adopt and bring up."
"I follow you, sir."
"Put the case that he lived in an atmosphere of evil, and that all he saw of children was their being generated in great numbers for certain destruction."
"I follow you, sir."
"Put the case, Pip, that here was one pretty little girl out of the heap who could be saved, whom the father believed dead and dared make no stir about, as to whom, over the mother, the legal adviser had this power: give the child into my hands, and I will do my best to bring you off. If you are saved, your child is saved too. If you are lost, your child is still saved. Put the case that this was done, and that the woman was cleared."
"I understand you perfectly."
"But that I make no admissions."
"That you make no admissions."
"Put the case that the child grew up and was married for money, that the mother was still living and her whereabouts unknown, that the father was still living and was a convict sent for life to the colonies. Do you still comprehend the imaginary case?"
My voice quaked in my throat as I answered, "Quite."
"And finally, Pip, put the case that this convict is known to have lately returned from those same colonies, although sent for life. Put that last case to yourself very carefully."
"I do," I replied faintly.
"For whose sake would you reveal the secret? For the father's? I think he would not be much the better for the knowledge. For the daughter's? I think it would hardly serve her to establish her parentage for the information of her husband, and to drag her back to disgrace after an escape of 20 years, pretty secure to last for life. But add the case that you had loved her, Pip, and had made her the subject of those poor dreams which have at one time or another been in the heads of more men than you think likely. Then I tell you that you had better, and would much sooner, when you had thought well of it, chop off that bandaged left hand of yours with your bandaged right hand, and then pass the chopper on to Wemmick there to cut that off too."
I looked at Wemmick, whose face was very grave. He gravely touched his lips with his forefinger. I did the same. Mr. Jaggers did the same. From Little Britain I went, with my cheque in my pocket, straight to Clarriker's, and had the great satisfaction of concluding that arrangement. It was the only good thing I had done, and the only completed thing I had done since I was first apprised of my great expectations. Thereupon I went home. On opening the outer door of our chambers with my key, I found a letter in the box directed to me. A very dirty letter, though not ill-written. It had been delivered by hand, of course, since I left home. And its contents were these: "If you are not afraid to come to the old marshes tonight or tomorrow night at 9, and to come to the little sluice house by the lime kiln, you had better come. If you want information regarding your Uncle Provis, you had much better come, and tell no one and lose no time. You must come alone. Bring this with you." I had had load enough upon my mind before the receipt of this strange letter. Nevertheless, towards our village and the marshes I now went straight, having no time to spare. It was a dark night, though the full moon rose as I left the enclosed lands and passed out upon the marshes. I knew the lime kiln as well as I knew the old battery. As I drew near to the kiln, the lime was burning with a sluggish, stifling smell. but the fires were made up and left, and no workmen were visible. Hard by was a small stone quarry. It lay directly in my way, and had been worked that day, as I saw by the tools and barrows that were lying about. I saw a light in the old sluice house. I quickened my pace and knocked at the door. There was no answer, and I knocked again. No answer still, and I tried the latch. The door yielded. I called, "Is anyone here?" But no voice answered. The next thing I comprehended was that I had been caught in a strong running noose, thrown over my head from behind. "Who is it? Help! Help! Help!"
"Now I've got you."
The voice I heard behind me belonged to Orlick. Whom I had looked for, I don't know. I had not looked for him. Seeing him, I felt that I was in a dangerous strait indeed.
"Now I've got you."
"Unbind me. Let me go."
I'll let you go. I'll let you go to the moon, all in good time."
"Why have you lured me here?
"Don't you know?"
Why have you set upon me in the dark?"
"Because I mean to do it all myself. One keeps a secret better'n two. Oh, you enemy. You enemy. How dared you come betwixt me and a young woman I liked?"
"When did I?"
"When didn't you? It was you as always give old Orlick a bad name to her."
"You gave it to yourself. You gained it for yourself. I could have done you no harm if you had done yourself none."
"You're a liar."
He shook his heavy hand at me, with his mouth snarling like a tiger's. "What are you going to do to me?"
"I'm gonna have your life."
He leaned forward, staring at me, and drew his hand across his mouth as if his mouth watered for me.
"You was always in old Orlick's way since ever you was a child. You goes out of his way this present night. He'll have no more on you. You're dead."
I felt that I had come to the brink of my grave. For a moment I looked wildly round my trap for any chance of escape, but there was none.
"More'n that," said he. "I won't have a rag of you. I won't have a bone of you left on earth. I'll put your body in the kiln. I'd carry two such to it on my shoulders, and people shall never know nothing."
I saw that Orlick had been drinking, and his eyes were red and bloodshot. I smelt the strong spirits that I saw flash into his face.
"Old Orlick's going to tell you something. It was you as did for your shrew sister."
"It was you, villain."
"I tell you it was your doing. I tell you it was done through you. I came upon her from behind, as I come upon you tonight. I give it to her. I left her for dead, and if there'd been a lime kiln as nigh her as there is now nigh you, she shouldn't have come to life again. But it wasn't old Orlick as did it. It was you. You was favoured, and he was bullied and beat. Old Orlick bullied and beat, eh? Now you pays for it. You done it. Now you pays for it."
He drank again, and became more ferocious.
"I'll tell you something more. It was old Orlick as you tumbled over on your stairs that night. And why was old Orlick there? I'll tell you something more. I've took up with new companions and new masters. Some of 'em writes my letters when I wants 'em wrote. Writes my letters. They writes 50 hands. They're not like sneaking you as writes but one. I've had a firm mind and a firm will to have your life since you was down here at your sister's burying. I haven't seen a way to get you safe, and I've looked after you to know your ins and your outs. For, says old Orlick to himself, somehow or another I'll have him. What? When I looks for you, I finds your Uncle Provis, eh? When I knowed you at Gargery's, you hadn't found no uncles then. No, not you. But when old Orlick comes for to hear that your Uncle Provis had most like wore the leg iron what old Orlick had picked up, filed asunder on these meshes ever so many year ago, and what he kept by him till he dropped your sister with it like a bullock, as he means to drop you, eh? When he come for to hear that, eh? There's them that can't, and that won't have Magwitch, yes. I know the name. Alive in the same land with them. Perhaps it's them that writes 50 hands, and that's not like sneaking you as writes but one. Ware Compasson, Magwitch, and the gallows."
Then, with a sudden hurry of violence and swearing horribly, he stooped, and I saw in his hand a stone hammer with a long, heavy handle. I shouted out with all my might, and struggled with all my might. It was only my head and my legs that I could move, but to that extent I struggled with all the force until then unknown that was within me. In the same instant, I heard responsive shouts, saw figures and a gleam of light dash in at the door, heard voices and tumult, and saw Orlick emerge from a struggle of men as if it were tumbling water, clear the table at a leap, and fly out into the night. After a blank, I found that I was lying unbound on the floor in the same place, with my head on someone's knee. "Herbert! Oh, great heaven! Gently, Handel. Don't be too eager." "And our old comrade Startop!" I cried, as he too bent over me. Entreating Herbert to tell me how he had come to my rescue, which at first he had flatly refused to do, but had insisted on my remaining quiet, I learnt that I had in my hurry dropped the letter open in our chambers, where he found it very soon after I was gone. Its tone made him uneasy, and he set off for the coach office with Startop. They followed the instructions in the note, when suddenly I cried out loudly, and they answered the cries, and rushed in. When I told Herbert what had passed within the house, he was for immediately going before a magistrate in the town, late at night as it was, and getting out a warrant. But I had already considered that such a course, by detaining us there, or binding us to come back, might be fatal to Provis, and we relinquished all thoughts of pursuing Orlick at that time. Only one course lay before us. We must get Provis away. In London the next day, I set about hiring a rowing boat. Our plan was this. We intended to row down to the long reaches below Gravesend, between Kent and Essex, where the river is broad and solitary. There we meant to lie by until the steamer for Hamburg and then the steamer for Rotterdam would start from London. We would hail the first, and if by any accident we were not taken aboard, we should have another chance. The relief of being at last engaged in the execution of the purpose was so great to me that I felt it difficult to realize the condition in which I had been a few hours before. The crisp air, the movement of the river, and the moving river itself freshened me with new hope. I felt mortified to be of so little use in the boat, but there were few better oarsmen than Herbert and Startop, and they rowed with a steady stroke that was to last all day. Provis had a boat cloak with him and a black canvas bag, and he looked as like a river pilot as my heart could have wished.
"Dear boy, faithful dear boy, well done. Thank ye, thank ye."
"If all goes well, you will be perfectly free and safe again within a few hours."
"Well, I hope so."
"And think so?" He dipped his hand in the water over the boat's gunwale.
I suppose I think so, dear boy. But we can no more see to the bottom of the next few hours than we can see to the bottom of this river what I catches hold of. Nor yet we can't no more hold their tide than I can hold this, and it's run through my fingers and gone, you see."
And he held up his dripping hand. The tide was yet with us when we were off Gravesend. As our charge was wrapped in his cloak, I purposely passed within a boat or two's length of the floating custom-house, and so out to catch the stream, alongside of 2 emigrant ships, and under the bows of a large transport, with troops on the forecastle looking down at us. We rowed on. The red sun was on the low level of the shore, in a purple haze fast deepening into black, and there was the solitary flat marsh, and far away there were the rising grounds, between which and us there seemed to be no life, save here and there in the foreground a melancholy gull. We rowed out into the track of the steamers, and soon saw their smoke. As they were coming on at full speed, we got our 2 bags ready, and took that opportunity of saying good-bye to Herbert and Startop. We had all shaken hands cordially, and neither Herbert's eyes nor mine were quite dry, when I saw a 4-oared galley with 2 men in it shoot out from under the bank but a little way ahead of us, and row out into the same track. The first steamer was nearing us very fast, and the beating of her paddles grew louder and louder. I felt as if her shadow were absolutely upon us when the galley hailed us.
"You have a return transport there. His name is Abel Magwitch, otherwise Provis. I apprehend that man and call upon him to surrender and you to assist."
At the same moment, without giving any audible direction to his crew, he ran the galley aboard of us. They had pulled one sudden stroke ahead, had got their oars in, had run athwart us, and were holding on to our gunwale before we knew what they were doing. I saw the steersman of the galley lay his hand on his prisoner's shoulder. I saw the prisoner start up, lean across his captor, and pull the cloak from the neck of the other sitter in the galley. Still in the same moment I saw that the face disclosed was the face of the other convict of long ago. Still in the same moment I saw the face tilt backward with a white terror on it that I shall never forget, and heard a great cry on board the steamer and a loud splash in the water, and felt the boat sink from under me. It was but for an instant that I seemed to struggle. That instant past, I was taken on board the galley. Herbert was there and Startop was there, but our boat was gone, and the two convicts were gone. Presently a dark object was seen in the water bearing towards us on the tide. As it came nearer, I saw it to be Magwitch, swimming but not swimming freely. He was taken on board and instantly manacled at the wrists and ankles. Magwitch had received some very severe injury in the chest and a deep cut in the head. He told me that he believed himself to have gone under the keel of the steamer and to have been struck on the head in rising. He added that he did not pretend to say what he might or might not have done to Compeyson, but that it was certain he was drowned. We remained at the customs house until the tide turned, and then Magwitch was carried down to the galley and put on board. Herbert and Startop were to get to London by land as soon as they could. We had a doleful parting, and when I took my place by Magwitch's side, I felt that that was my place henceforth, while he lived. For now, my repugnance to him had all melted away, and in the hunted, wounded, shackled creature who held my hand in his, I only saw a man who had meant to be my benefactor, and who had felt affectionately, gratefully, and generously towards me with great constancy through a series of years. I only saw in him a much better man than I had been to Joe. Magwitch lay in prison, very ill during the whole interval between his committal for trial and the coming round of the sessions in April. When he was put to the bar, he was seated in a chair. No objection was made to my getting close to the dock on the outside of it, and holding the hand that he stretched forth to me. Such things as could be said for him were said, how he had taken to industrious habits, and had thriven lawfully and reputably. But nothing could unsay the fact that he had returned, and was there in presence of the judge and jury. It was impossible to try him for that and do otherwise than find him guilty. The appointed punishment for his return to the land that had cast him out being death, and his case being this aggravated case, he must prepare himself to die. Rising for a moment, the prisoner said,
"My lord, I have received my sentence of death from the Almighty, but I bow to yours,"
and sat down again. The daily visits I could make him were shortened now, and he was more strictly kept. As the days went on, I noticed more and more that he would lie placidly looking at the white ceiling, with an absence of light in his face, until some word of mine brightened it for an instant. The number of days had risen to 10, when I saw a greater change in him than I had seen yet. His eyes were turned towards the door, and lighted up as I entered.
"Thank ye, dear boy. Thank ye. God bless you. You've never deserted me, dear boy."
I pressed his hand in silence, for I could not forget that I had once meant to desert him.
"And what's the best of all, you've been more comfortable along of me since I was under a dark cloud than when the sun shone. That's the best of all."
He lay on his back, breathing with great difficulty. "Are you in much pain today?"
"I don't complain of none, dear boy."
"You never do complain." He had spoken his last words. He smiled, and I understood his touch to mean that he wished to lift my hand and lay it on his breast. I laid it there, and he smiled again, and put both his hands upon it. The allotted time ran out while we were thus, but looking round I found the governor of the prison standing near me, and he whispered, "You needn't go yet." The governor stepped aside, and beckoned the officer away. "Dear Magwitch, I must tell you now, at last. You understand what I say?" A gentle pressure on my hand. You had a child once, whom you loved and lost. A stronger pressure on my hand. She lived, and found powerful friends. She is living now. She is a lady, and very beautiful. And I love her. With a last faint effort, which would have been powerless but for my yielding to it and assisting it, he raised my hand to his lips. Then he gently let it sink upon his breast again, with his own hands lying on it. The placid look at the white ceiling came back and passed away, and his head dropped quietly on his breast. Now that I was left wholly to myself, I was falling very ill. The late stress upon me had enabled me to put off illness, but not to put it away. For a day or two I lay on the sofa or on the floor, anywhere according as I happened to sink down, with a heavy head and aching limbs, and no purpose and no power. Then there came one night which appeared of great duration, and which teemed with anxiety and horror, and when in the morning I tried to sit up in my bed and think of it, I found I could not do so. After I had turned the worst point of my illness, I began to notice that whoever came about me settled down into Joe. At last, one day, I took courage and said, "Is it Joe?" And the dear old home voice answered, "Which it air, old chap?" "Oh, Joe, you break my heart. Look angry at me, Joe. Strike me, Joe. Tell me of my ingratitude. Don't be so good to me." For Joe had actually laid his head down on the pillow at my side and put his arm round my neck in his joy that I knew him. "Which dear old Pip, old chap, you and me was ever friends. And when you're well enough to go out for a ride, what larks!" After which Joe withdrew to the window and stood with his back towards me, wiping his eyes. And as my extreme weakness prevented me from getting up and going to him, I lay there, penitently whispering, "Oh, God bless him. Oh, God bless this gentle Christian man." Joe's eyes were red when I next found him beside me, but I was holding his hand, and we both felt happy. "How long, dear Joe?" "Which you mean to say, Pip? How long have your illness lasted, dear old chap?" "Yes, Joe." "It's the end of May, Pip. Tomorrow's the 1st of June. "And have you been here all the time, dear Joe?" "Pretty nigh, old chap. For when the news of your being ill were brought by letter, Biddy, her word were, go to him without loss of time." There Joe cut himself short, and informed me that I was to be talked to in great moderation, and that I was to take a little nourishment at stated frequent times, whether I felt inclined for it or not, and that I was to submit myself to all his orders. Not to make Joe uneasy by talking too much, even if I had been able to talk much, I deferred asking him about Miss Havisham until next day. He shook his head when I then asked him if she had recovered. "Did she linger long, Joe?" "After you was took ill, pretty much about what you might call, if you was put to it, a week." "Dear Joe, have you heard what becomes of her property?" "Well, old chap, it do appear that she had settled the most of it, which I mean to say tied it up, on Miss Estella. But she had wrote out a little coddle shell in her own hand a day or two afore the accident, leaving a cool 4,000 to Mr. Matthew Pocket. And why do you suppose, above all things, Pip, she left that cool 4,000 unto him? Because of Pip's account of him, the said Matthew. I'm told by Biddy that ere the writing." This account gave me great joy, as it perfected the only good thing I had done. "And now, you ain't that strong yet, old chap, that you can take in more'n a one additional shovelful today. Old Orlick, he's been a-busting open a dwelling-house." "Whose?" "Pumblechook's. And now Orlick's in the county jail." I recovered my strength and health gradually. It was on the third or fourth occasion of my going out walking, leaning on Joe's arm, that I saw this change in him very plainly. We had been sitting in the bright, warm sunlight, looking at the river, and I chanced to say, as we got up, "See, Joe, I can walk quite strongly. Now you shall see me walk back by myself. Which do not overdo it, Pip, but I shall be happy for to see you able, sir." The last word grated on me, but how could I remonstrate? I then pretended to be weaker than I was and asked Joe for his arm. Joe gave it me, but was thoughtful. It was a thoughtful evening with both of us. "I feel thankful that I have been ill, Joe." "Dear old Pip, old chap, you're almost come round, sir." "It has been a memorable time for me, Joe." "Likewise for myself, sir." "We have had a time together, Joe, that I can never forget. There were days once, I know, that I did, for a while, forget. But I never shall forget these." "Pip, there has been larks, and, dear sir, what have been betwixt us, have been." At night, when I had gone to bed, Joe came into my room, as he had done all through my recovery. He asked me if I felt sure that I was as well as in the morning. "Yes, dear Joe, quite." "And are always a-getting stronger, old chap?" "Yes, dear Joe, steadily." Joe patted the coverlet on my shoulder with his great good hand, and said, in what I thought a husky voice, "Good night." When I got up in the morning, refreshed and stronger yet, I found a letter on the breakfast table. "Not wishful to intrude, I have departed, for you are well again, dear Pip, and will do better without Joe. P.S. Ever the best of friends." What remained for me now but to follow him to the dear old forge? The purpose was that I would go to Biddy, that I would show her how humbled and repentant I came back, that I would tell her how I had lost all I once hoped for. I would say to her, "Biddy, I think you once liked me very well. If you can like me only half as well once more, I hope I am a little worthier of you than I was." Such was my purpose. After 3 days more of recovery, I went down to the old place to put it in execution. The tidings of my high fortunes, having had a heavy fall, had got down to my native place and its neighbourhood before I got there. The Blue Boar could not put me into my usual bedroom, which was engaged, probably by someone who had expectations, and could only assign me a very indifferent chamber among the pigeons and post-chaises up the yard. Early in the morning, while my breakfast was getting ready, I strolled round by Satis' house. There were printed bills on the gate, and on bits of carpet hanging out of the windows, announcing a sale by auction of the house and effects next week. Stepping in for a moment at the open gate and looking around me with the uncomfortable air of a stranger who had no business there, I saw the auctioneer's clerk walking on the casks and telling them off for the information of a catalogue compiler, pen in hand, who made a temporary desk of the wheeled chair I had so often pushed along. After breakfast, I set out to see Biddy and Joe. The June weather was delicious. The sky was blue, the larks were soaring high over the green corn. I thought all that countryside more beautiful and peaceful by far than I had ever known it to be yet. Many pleasant pictures of the life that I would lead there beguiled my way. I was disappointed to find that Biddy's house was closed. The forge was a very short distance off, and I went towards it under the sweet green limes, listening for the clink of Joe's hammer. Long after I ought to have heard it, and long after I had fancied I heard it, and found it but a fancy, all was still. No gleam of fire, no glittering shower of sparks, no roar of bellows. All was shut up, and still. But the house was not deserted, and the best parlour seemed to be in use, for there were white curtains fluttering in its window, and the window was open and gay with flowers. I went softly towards it, meaning to peep over the flowers, when Joe and Biddy stood before me arm in arm. At first Biddy gave a cry as if she thought it was my apparition, but in another moment she was in my embrace. I wept to see her, and she wept to see me. I because she looked so fresh and pleasant, she because I looked so worn and white. But, dear Biddy, how smart you are.
Yes, dear Pip.
And Joe, how smart you are.
Yes, dear old Pip, old chap.
I looked at both of them, from one to the other, and then Biddy cried in a burst of happiness,
It's my wedding day, and I am married to Joe.
They had taken me into the kitchen, and I had laid my head down on the old deal table. Biddy held one of my hands to her lips, and Joe's restoring touch was on my shoulder.
"Which you weren't strong enough, my dear, for it to be surprised,"
said Joe. And Biddy said,
I ought to have thought of it, dear Joe, but I was too happy.
They were both so overjoyed to see me, so proud to see me, so touched by my coming to them, so delighted that I should have come by accident to make their day complete. My first thought was one of great thankfulness that I had never breathed this last baffled hope of mine to Joe. How often, while he was with me in my illness, had it risen to my lips! How irrevocable would have been his knowledge of it if he had remained with me but another hour. "Dear Biddy," said I, "you have the best husband in the whole world, and if you could have seen him by my bed, you would have... But no, you couldn't love him better than you do.
No, I couldn't indeed.
And, dear Joe, you have the best wife in the whole world, and she will make you as happy as even you deserve to be, you dear, good, noble Joe." Joe looked at me with a quivering lip, and fairly put his sleeve before his eyes. They were both melted by these words, and both entreated me to say no more. I sold all I had, and put aside as much as I could for a composition with my creditors, who gave me ample time to pay them in full. Within a month I had quitted England, and within 2 months, with Herbert's help, was clerk to Clarriker & Co., Eastern Branch, and within 4 months I assumed my first undivided responsibility. Many a year went round before I was a partner in the house, but I lived happily and lived frugally, and paid my debts, and maintained a constant correspondence with Biddy and Joe. For 11 years I had not seen Joe nor Biddy, when upon an evening in December, an hour or 2 after dark, I laid my hand softly on the latch of the old kitchen door. I touched it so softly that I was not heard, and looked in unseen. There, smoking his pipe in the old place by the kitchen firelight, as hale and as strong as ever, though a little grey, sat Joe. And there, fenced into the corner with Joe's leg, and sitting on my own little stool looking at the fire, was I again.
"We give him the name of Pip for your sake, dear old chap," said Joe, delighted when I took another stool by the child's side. "And we hoped he might grow a little bit like you. And we think he do."
Dear Pip,
said Biddy when I talked to her later.
You are sure you don't fret for her?
"Oh, no, I think not, Biddy."
Tell me as an old, old friend, have you quite forgotten her?
"My dear Biddy, I have forgotten nothing in my life that ever had a foremost place there, and little that ever had any place there. But that poor dream, as I once used to call it, has all gone by, Biddy. All gone by. Nevertheless, I knew while I said those words that I secretly intended to revisit the site of the old house next day, alone, for her sake. Yes, even so, for Estella's sake. I had heard of her as leading a most unhappy life, and as being separated from her husband, who had used her with great cruelty, and who had become quite renowned as a compound of pride, avarice, brutality, and meanness. And I had heard of the death of her husband from an accident consequent on his ill treatment of a horse. This release had befallen her some 2 years before. For anything I knew, she was married again. The day had quite declined when I finally came to the place. There was no house now, no brewery, no building whatever left, but the wall of the old garden. A cold silvery mist had veiled the afternoon, and the moon was not yet up to scatter it. But the stars were shining beyond the mist, and the moon was coming, and the evening was not dark. I could trace out where every part of the old house had been, and where the brewery had been, and where the gates, and where the casks. I had done so, and was looking along the desolate garden walk, when I beheld a solitary figure in it. Estella.
I am greatly changed. I wonder you knew me.
The freshness of her beauty was indeed gone, but its indescribable majesty and its indescribable charm remained. We sat down on a bench that was near, and I said, "After so long, it is strange that we should thus meet again, Estella, here where our first meeting was. Do you often come back?"
I have never been here since.
Nor I. Estella was the next to break the silence that ensued between us.
I have very often hoped and intended to come back, but have been prevented by many circumstances. Poor, poor old place. The ground belongs to me. It is the only possession I have not relinquished. Everything else has gone from me, little by little, but I have kept this. It was the subject of the only determined resistance I made in all the wretched years.
Is it to be built on?
At last it is. I came here to take leave of it before its change. And you? You live abroad still?
Still.
And do well, I am sure.
I work pretty hard for a sufficient living, and therefore, yes, I do well.
I have often thought of you.
Have you?
Of late, very often.
You have always held your place in my heart. And we were silent again, until she spoke.
I little thought that I should take leave of you in taking leave of this spot. I am very glad to do so.
Glad to part again, Estella? To me, parting is a painful thing. To me, the remembrance of our last parting has been ever mournful and painful.
But you said to me, "God bless you. God forgive you." And if you could say that to me then, you will not hesitate to say that to me now. Now, when suffering has been stronger than all other teaching, and has taught me to understand what your heart used to be. I have been bent and broken, but I hope into a better shape. Be as considerate and good to me as you were, and tell me we are friends.
We are friends.
And will continue friends, apart?
I took her hand in mine, and we went out of the ruined place. And as the morning mists had risen long ago when I first left the forge, so the evening mists were rising now. And in all the broad expanse of tranquil light they showed to me, I saw no shadow of another parting from her.